Few are more powerful than the desire to be loved.
She wanted what she saw other people have. She wanted it so bad that anybody could have came along and swept her off her feet.
When they met, she felt like she had finally found her person. She was all in.
When it finally takes hold, it can feel like nothing else matters.
This was her first serious relationship. This was deeper than anything she had ever known.
But those who are smitten can sometimes lose their grip on reality.
We've all had bad moments. Some moments are worse than others.
She lost her sense of perspective and did things that in the cold light of day seemed absurd.
And when that happens, a bad situation can spiral into something far worse.
I don't think anyone expected that this was going to turn out the way that it did.
Love is not defined by how far you're willing to go to prove your love to someone.
30th, 2022, Tacoma, Washington. It's nearly daybreak in the port city located along Puget Sound, 30 miles south of Seattle.
Tacoma got the nickname the City of Destiny because it was picked as the western endpoint of the Northern Pacific Railroad back in the 1800s.
Tacoma's a really special community to me. I mean, it's just very vibrant in its diversity. It's a working class, gritty city. It's a very progressive community.
You see all these different kind of people. It's just different cultures blending together.
But the city also has its darker side. The crime rate is high, nearly 3 times the national average.
2022 was a really bad year for homicides. It was the worst on record. So I was writing about a homicide practically, every day, every other day.
At 5:23 a.m., a 911 call comes into the Tacoma police dispatcher reporting a gunfight in the parking lot of an AM/PM gas station. The caller also reports that one of the 2 men engaged in the shootout has fled on foot.
When police arrive on the scene, they find a black male lying on the ground near the passenger side front bumper of a black sports car.
The man was unresponsive, so officers immediately began CPR to revive him at the scene.
Another officer sees a man standing near the entrance to the convenience store. The man identifies himself as Christopher Butler.
The officers talked to Butler, who said he is homeless and lives in his minivan. He usually parks in the neighborhood overnight, but this morning he was in his van in front of the convenience store when the shooting occurred.
Butler says that he was sitting there and a black sports car arrived and parked next to his van. He had a casual conversation with the driver, a black male around the age of 40. Butler says that's the same man that's now lying in the parking lot.
Paramedics with the Tacoma Fire Department arrive and take over the rescue efforts. They notice a large pool of blood around the man's body, as well as significant bleeding near his face and neck.
Paramedics noticed several gunshot wounds to his legs.
The situation is dire. It's clear that major arteries in his legs have been struck. And just minutes later, he's pronounced dead at the scene.
Butler tells the officer that there was someone else inside the sports car, a black woman sitting in the front passenger seat.
He says that at one point the woman got out of the car and ran into the store. He describes her as 5'8", maybe 5'9". She had a dark complexion with a weave in her hair.
He says that when he first saw the man and woman, they were sitting in the car smoking and seemed to be talking and laughing.
Butler says the car was in the gas station parking lot for nearly an hour. And during this time, the man moved the car into different spots in the lot.
At one point, the man moved the car to the parking lot in the strip mall adjacent to the gas station.
Butler informs the officer that around 5:20 a.m., he heard shouts from the direction of the sports car.
He heard a man yell, "What are you doing in my car?"
He saw the driver and another guy in the front of the car. And that's when he heard 7 to 10 shots ring out.
Butler saw the car's driver fall to the ground. The other man then fled from the vehicle, running in a northbound direction.
He described the male as being 35 years old, standing about 5'10", wearing a baggy red pullover-style hoodie.
He said he thought he must have been wearing a mask or something. He didn't get a good look at his face. And because of that, he felt he would not be able to identify him.
Seconds later, the woman who had been in the passenger seat of the sports car marched over to Butler and told him she had to leave.
With that, she began walking quickly away from the store. She headed in the same direction as the other man.
The driver's license described the victim as 39-year-old Ronald Hines.
Ronald Hines was born in 1983 to Ronald and Bertha Hines.
Ronald's upbringing seemed stable, and he had two loving parents. He had the kind of childhood that most people would say it was normal.
He appeared to be a productive member of society. He had two kids that he loved so much. At the core, it was a very strong family unit.
And Ronald seemed determined to help those who did not have the same good fortune.
He was a God-fearing man who would do good deeds for strangers that he met on the street.
He helped some people get back to school and others find God.
His parents talked about how he would help people find jobs. He would also help them get medical assistance and put rules over their heads.
Tacoma police now have Ronald's murder investigation on their hands. Detectives and other police units immediately converge on the gas station.
One of the officers instantly recognizes the black sports car as a vehicle he had conducted a traffic stop on 90 minutes prior to the shooting.
During the stop, Ronald Hines was identified as the driver. He had a passenger, a black female, approximately 20 to 30 years of age, who was wearing an orange shirt. The officer noted that her hair appeared to be styled with dreadlocks.
At the time of the stop, the officer did not ask the woman for identification.
At that point, there was no reason to ask the woman for identification because it was the driver who had committed the infraction.
And he gave the officer his license. It was Ronald Hines.
At the time of the stop, the officers ran the name Ronald Hines through their computer systems and learned that he was listed as a protected person in an order with a woman named Tiana Williams.
The officer runs Tiana Williams through the police computer database and finds a Washington state driver's license, as well as several booking photos.
The officer looked at the photos of Tiana Williams and determined that she was a match for the woman that he had seen in Ronald Hines' car earlier that night.
They also find that there's a current protection order for Hines against Tiana Williams. This means that she must have threatened him at some point, enough so that he got an order to keep her away.
Detectives believe they've uncovered a suspect in the murder of Ronald Hines. Tiana Williams.
She was with him 90 minutes before during the car stop, so this means she was likely with him at the gas station.
She's also the same woman who fled the scene, headed in the same general direction as the man who shot Hines. But the big question is, where is she now?
A shooting in the parking lot of a Tacoma, Washington gas station has left 39-year-old Ronald Hines dead. Police believe they've identified the woman in the car with Hines before the shooting, 29-year-old Tiana Williams.
But why was Williams with him that night? And was she involved with his shooting in the gas station parking lot?
Detectives process the crime scene. Near Ronald Hines' body is a .40 caliber handgun.
Detectives believe the trigger of the gun was likely shot off, suggesting that Hines was unable to return fire as he was being shot.
At the same area, crime scene technicians find 15 9mm shell casings.
Detectives meet with the manager of the gas station. He provides them with video from surveillance cameras that monitor the parking lot.
This is a huge break for detectives. That means that all of the activity leading up to the murder has been caught on tape.
The video shows Hines' black sports car pull into the parking lot at 4:24 a.m., just a few minutes after his traffic stop.
The video confirms there was a young woman in the car and she was sitting in the front passenger seat.
Hines parks his vehicle at the convenience store. The woman gets out and goes inside. A few minutes later, she comes out and makes contact with a man standing outside the store.
It appears as though they know each other as they talked for several moments outside of the store. Then she gets back into the sports car with Hines.
Over the next hour, Hines moves his car around various spots in the parking lot and to the east in the neighboring strip mall. At 5:22 a.m., a man approaches the gas station on foot.
The man comes from behind the sports car and immediately walks up to the window, which is rolled down.
The man appears to be holding a handgun, and it looks like he points the weapon inside the window.
The video shows Ronald Hines open the driver's side door and step out of his car.
There isn't any audio, but you can see that the two men appear to be firing at each other over the top of the vehicle. The other man seems to chase Hines around the vehicle.
The man eventually catches up to Hines in front of the vehicle, shooting him in the legs, causing him to fall to the ground.
With Hines on the ground, the man walks up and shoots him in the head.
Hines seemed defenseless as the man fired at his head. It looked like an execution.
The surveillance video then shows a woman getting out of the sports car.
As she exits, she comes eye to eye with the suspect. Detectives don't see any reaction from her, so they can't really tell if they know each other or not.
She walks towards the convenience store, past the witness, Christopher Butler.
The video shows the suspect then go to the car and rummage through it.
It's not really clear if the man took anything out of the car. He then goes back to Ronald Hines' body lying on the ground.
He digs through Hines' pants pockets and appears to take something out of his pocket, possibly a cell phone, although it's not really clear.
The suspect runs away from the scene in a northerly direction. The woman is also seen headed in a northerly direction.
Detectives study the woman on the tape, and she appears to match the woman seen on the body cam video of the traffic stop an hour earlier.
As detectives study the surveillance video from an adjacent parking lot, they notice a second vehicle, a dark-colored sedan.
The vehicle was suspicious because it was driving through the parking lot with its headlights off. And it also looked like it was keeping tabs on Ronald Hines.
As Hines moved his sports car around the parking lot, the sedan moved around, attempting to keep him in view.
The fact that the sedan was in the parking lot for an extended period of time early in the morning, that told investigators that it probably played a role in this murder.
Police create a bulletin with images of the suspect from the surveillance video, as well as information on the suspicious sedan. That bulletin is distributed to Tacoma police and other law enforcement agencies throughout the state.
This is the best way to get the word out about this vehicle, in the hopes that someone will spot it.
As day breaks, Tacoma police bring in a canine unit in an attempt to track down the suspect.
The canine was able to follow the track for about 100 yards or so, but eventually it lost its scent. They were not able to locate the suspect or the woman.
We got nothing down here.
Detectives focus on mapping out Ronald Hines' movements prior to the shooting. They know he was pulled over for a traffic violation about an hour before the incident. As patrol officers continue searching for the couple, detectives receive a call from a patrol officer who was reviewing footage from a motel a mile south from where Hines' car was stopped.
The officer observed Hines and Williams in the motel parking lot, and then reached out to detectives on the case to pass on the information.
Investigators go to the motel and learn from an employee that a party took place at the motel that night.
They think that Hines and Williams may have been coming from the party when they were stopped, so detectives are eager to comb through the footage.
The surveillance video from the motel shows the parking lot filled with people congregating there, talking and drinking.
At approximately 3 a.m. on the video, investigators spot a woman who appears to be Tiana Williams.
But Williams is not with Ronald Hines. The video shows her with another man, who appears to be the man who shot Ronald Hines in the gas station parking lot.
Williams is wearing the same clothing during the traffic stop as the video from the gas station. The shooting suspect is wearing the exact same clothing, a long-sleeve red shirt and dark shorts. His face mask is pulled onto his head so it looks more like a beanie cap. But the video is a little too indistinct to notice his facial features.
Ronald Hines enters the camera view about a half hour later, 3:38 a.m. The doors to his sports car are open.
The woman walks over to him as they make contact, and she began talking to him.
After she talks to Hines, she walks away and speaks to the shooting suspect and another male.
At approximately 4:08 a.m., the woman police believe to be Tiana Williams walks back to Hines and gets into the passenger seat of his sports car.
The suspect walks up to the passenger door and appears to want to talk through the window.
The suspect walks across the parking lot and gets into the sedan. Another man then runs across the parking lot and also appears to get into the sedan.
The sedan then pulls out of the parking lot, heading in the same direction as Ronald Hines.
For detectives, the videos are like watching a silent movie. They see the various people moving around, but there's no audio. So it's hard to determine exactly what the motivations are. Still, it does link all of these people together.
The only person that police believe they have identified is Tiana Williams. So detectives concentrate on contacting her.
They reach out to family members, but they claimed that they are no longer in contact with Tiana and did not know where she was located.
Detectives tried every conceivable method to contact Williams, but she seems to have vanished.
August 10th, 2022. Almost 2 weeks into the investigation of Ronald Hines' murder, Tacoma police have hit a dead end. While the shooting itself was caught on surveillance video, police have no clue who the suspect may be.
They believe that they've identified his accomplice, a 29-year-old woman named Tiana Williams. But efforts to locate her have gone nowhere.
Their hope is that someone will come forward and help them to identify a sedan seen in the gas station parking lot.
Then detectives catch a break. They're notified by the Pierce County Sheriff's Department that they've located a sedan that matches the description of the missing car about 7 miles southeast of the crime scene.
The vehicle has been impounded and towed to Tacoma Police Headquarters to be searched.
That afternoon, police receive a phone call from a 24-year-old woman named Tyshell Ellis Dorsey, who was inquiring about her sedan that had been impounded.
Detectives ask Tyshell to come to police headquarters for an interview. They want to find out if she has any information about the shooting. Tyshell Ellis was born in Tacoma, Washington, to a single mother.
I got pregnant with Tyshell when I was 17. I didn't do it on purpose, but I felt like because of how she was conceived, I felt like it was meant for her to be here.
Tyshell knew grief at an early age. Her father died when she was just 5 years old. Still, Tyshell showed much promise as she entered school.
She was a very intelligent child. She got very good grades in school. She has this really bubbly, fun personality. She always makes people smile.
She's always been happy. She's always been extroverted. And she's always been that person to pick you up. I mean, sky's the limit for her.
Tired of the unending rain, Sanao moved the family to Texas when Tyshell was 12.
We have like maybe 2 months of summer and sun, and then it's gray. It's depressing sometimes. Here I wanted my girls to see there's more out there.
They later moved to Georgia to be near Sanao's father.
My father wanted us to move there He wanted a relationship with his granddaughters and with me, and that didn't work out quite well.
Sanau decided to move the family back home again to Washington. But she needed to lean hard on her now 20-year-old daughter.
She worked so that she could give me the money for us to come home. She also drove the truck because I was scared to drive the truck. So she, don't worry, Mommy, I got it. Without her, I don't know if I would have made it through a lot of things.
In Tacoma, Toshelle took a job at a local gas station convenience store. She would eventually cross paths with Malik Patterson, a man with a similarly difficult past.
Malik was born in Tacoma, but his family moved around a lot.
As a child and young teen, he enjoyed sports and was constantly outside, riding bicycles with friends or playing basketball.
Malik never knew his father and found a mentor in his grandfather.
In high school, he got involved in criminal activity. When Malik's grandfather died, his bad behavior escalated a lot.
He met Toshelle through a mutual friend and hit her up every day on Facebook. They quickly became inseparable, going out to hookah bars or simply hanging out at Toshelle's apartment.
Malik just got out of a relationship with the mother of his child and was still trying to get past that, so he wanted to keep their relationship chill.
But Toshelle seems like she's all in. She'd never really been in a serious relationship before, so she wanted to be in one badly.
She felt like all of her friends had kids or they were in relationships, and she kind of felt left out. And I would remind her everybody has their time, so you don't have to rush to find anybody, and find the right guy.
Now Toshelle is at a police station to be questioned about her car that appears to be connected to Ronald Hines' murder.
Toshelle told police that she had purchased the vehicle from someone in Pasco, Washington. The car was still registered in the other woman's name because Toshelle was still trying to save up money to transfer the ownership.
Detectives asked her if she had gone to a party at a motel on July 30th, 2022. Toshelle says that she did.
So they show her an aerial photograph of the parking lot, and she confirms the location of the vehicle, which coincides with the surveillance video.
Toshelle said she had gone to the party to see a man named Malik Patterson, who she had been dating for approximately 1 month.
Toshelle Ellis Dorsey shows Malik Patterson's Facebook profile to detectives.
They took one look at Malik Patterson and immediately saw a striking resemblance to the shooting suspect.
Detectives asked her about the party, and Toshelle said she was highly intoxicated that night, but remembered Malik at the party with other males. She said all the males were carrying firearms.
Detectives ask her what happened to her car that night. She claims the vehicle was stolen.
She said that she was in her room on the second story of the motel. Someone yelled up from the parking lot to the room and asked her where her car was located. At that time, she noticed that her keys and vehicle were missing.
Toshelle looked around and realized that Malik Patterson was no longer at the party, and she began to wonder if he had taken her keys and her car.
With her car gone, she began walking home. She lived quite a distance away, so she called her cousin and asked him to pick her up and take her home.
Toshelle tells detectives that sometime the next day, she received an anonymous phone call.
She said the caller told her that her car had been on the 8800 block of Waller Road. She got a ride from her cousin and sure enough, found her vehicle there. The problem was she didn't have the keys to her car and therefore couldn't drive it home. She asked her cousin to call a tow truck and had the vehicle towed back to her residence in Parkland.
Toshelle says she later asked Malik Patterson about her car, but he denied any involvement in taking it away from the party.
Detectives obviously wanted to find Malik Patterson immediately, so they asked Toshelle if she is still in touch with him. But she says he changed his phone number shortly thereafter, and he has rarely communicated with her since.
Detectives then show her screenshots of the motel parking lot, which include her and the man they believed was the suspected shooter.
The man was wearing a long-sleeved red shirt, dark-colored shorts, and a beanie cap. Tyshell told detectives that he looked like Malik Patterson, but she couldn't be sure because of the distance.
So investigators showed her another video of the person, and she immediately identified him as the man that she had been dating, Malik Patterson.
Based on the identification, police now have probable cause to arrest Malik Patterson for first-degree murder.
Not only do they believe that Malik is the man who shot Ronald Hines, they also believe that he's the man that took Tyshell's sedan and drove it to the gas station.
But there's something that doesn't quite add up. The surveillance video shows Malik Patterson fleeing on foot, along with Tiana Williams. How did Tyshell's sedan get to the gas station where she found it the next day, which was several miles away?
The only explanation was that there was an accomplice. But who is that person, and what role did they play in the murder?
Detectives in Tacoma, Washington learned from Tyshell Ellis Dorsey that the man in the motel surveillance footage was her boyfriend, Malik Patterson. Police believe Malik may have had two accomplices, Tiana Williams, the woman who was presumably with Hines at the time of the shooting, and an unknown man who drove Tyshell's stolen sedan from the crime scene.
Detectives have been unable to locate Tiana Williams, and they only have a vague description of the man that was with her, so they've been unable to locate either suspect.
On August 16, 2002, Tacoma police arrest Malik Patterson at his house without incident. They also take two other men, brothers of Malik Patterson, in for questioning.
Police noted that both of Malik's brothers bore the same physical characteristics as the man who was the getaway driver of the sedan.
It would make sense, right? If Malik is at the motel party, he could easily be there with family members, and they could easily have left the party with him. So they brought both brothers in for questioning as well.
Tyrell Patterson Moore, one of the brothers, agrees to speak with investigators.
He denied being involved in the murder. He said he was not at the party at the motel that night, and he did not drive the sedan to the gas station.
What's interesting is when Tyrell Patterson Moore was shown surveillance videos, he identified his brother, Malik, as the one who shot Ronell Hines.
The other brother, Xavier Patterson, also denied playing any role in the murder.
He said he was not at the party at the motel that night. And as for driving the sedan, Xavier said he didn't even know how to drive, so he could not have driven the car.
Detectives eventually cleared both of Malik's brothers from any involvement in the crime.
Malik Patterson agrees to talk with detectives. He tells them that he remembers going to a party that night, but did not remember exactly where it was held.
He described that the location of the party was an old motel that had been turned into apartments.
He says that he went to a party with the girl he's seeing named Tyshell. She was either 23 or 24 years old, and that she picked him up in her car, a sedan.
Patterson says he was drinking and using drugs that night and remembered little about what happened.
He was drinking heavily. He had also done some meth. He said he had left the party at one point, but couldn't really recall where he went. He woke up at someone's home, but doesn't remember the location.
He said that pretty much the entire night was a blank.
Detectives ask him if he knows anything about his girlfriend's car being stolen.
He admitted that Tyshell called him the next day to say that the car was stolen, but he did not remember anything else.
Detectives also ask him if he knows anything about a shooting at a gas station. And he says he saw a story on Facebook where two people were shooting at each other, but doesn't know any more about it.
He basically denies everything. I I don't know anything. I was too drunk. I don't remember.
Those are standard denials for someone who is involved in a crime. If they don't have an alibi, then say, I was too drunk to remember what happened. It's a way of deflecting responsibility away from you.
Detectives then show him photos from the motel surveillance video, pointing out Ronald Hines' black sports car.
Patterson looks at it and simply says, I've never seen that car before.
Detectives show Malik another photo that includes the woman involved in the incident. But he says he can't make out the person due to the poor quality of the photo.
When they show him a second screenshot of the woman, Patterson identifies her as his girlfriend, Tashelle Ellis.
Detectives are dumbfounded. They ask him if he's sure, and he says yes, that he was with her the night of the incident.
They continue to press him, trying to get him to admit to the shooting. But he continues to claim that he doesn't know anything about it. Finally, he asks to call his mother, who he says was in touch with his lawyer. Once he does that, the interview is over.
Police transport Malik Patterson to the jail, where he is booked on charges of first-degree murder.
Detectives are certain that Malik Patterson is the man who shot and killed Ronald Hines. And police officers had previously identified Tiana Williams as the person that was with him. But he claimed the woman who was with him at the party was his girlfriend, Tashelle Ellis Dorsey.
On the morning of Ronald Hines' murder, Tacoma police identified Tiana Williams as the woman who was with him when he was stopped by police for a driving infraction. But Malik Patterson, the man police believe shot Hines, now says the woman wasn't Tiana. It was his girlfriend, Tashelle Ellis Dorsey.
This is a key point. Hines had a restraining order against Tiana Williams. So investigators believe that this was likely the motivation for his murder, and she had been the passenger. But if it was Tashelle, then there must have been another reason for the shooting.
Faced with this contradiction, detectives re-examine the evidence in the case.
The first thing they did was review the surveillance footage from inside of the convenience store, because the woman with Hines had walked around the convenience store and purchased a beverage.
The footage captured several distinctive features on the woman, including multiple tattoos on her arm, including her shoulder, chest area. She was also wearing what appeared to be a weave and long false eyelashes.
When detectives interviewed Tashelle Ellis Dorsey on August 10th, she wore a long-sleeve jacket and cap.
Her clothing and hat concealed any tattoos on her arms, as well as her hairstyle.
They looked at the photos on Tashelle's Facebook profile and saw that she had the same tattoos on her arm as the woman in the convenience store.
Police had also dusted Ronald Hines' car for fingerprints. When they compared these latent prints to those on record for Tashelle, they find a match.
On the frame behind the right passenger door, they find the right palm print of Tashelle Ellis Dorsey. This proves that she was with Ronald Hines that night.
They now know that she lied to them in the first interview. So they go pick her up and they bring her in to talk again.
Tashelle is cooperative and agrees to talk to detectives. She admits driving Malik Patterson to the motel party on the night of the shooting. She tells them that a friend of Malik, whom she knew only as Ali, told her a man at the party with a black sports car was showing off an expensive gun.
Ali tells her that the gun is really unique and it's worth up to $1,000. So he suggests that she cozy up to the man so that he and Malik can steal the gun from him. That man is Ronald Hines.
Tashelle tells detectives that she originally said no and then agreed to the plan. She was eager to be loved and accepted, so she went along with it.
Tashelle says she asked Hines if he would give her a ride. He agreed.
They left the motel party and got pulled over for a traffic violation. So Tyshell was the woman that police officers saw.
Tyshell asked Hines to stop at the gas station so that she could get something to drink. She was texting Malik the entire time, telling them where they were. Malik and Ali were driving in Tyshell's sedan.
Tyshell tells detectives she kept Hines at the gas station, waiting for Malik and Ali to come and rob him.
Hines wanted to take her to a party and became suspicious about her delays. She says she kept him at the location by claiming she needs to sober up a bit.
She didn't understand why it was taking Malik and Ali so long to make their move.
Finally, after nearly an hour, Malik approaches Hines's car.
So Malik says, "This is a robbery. Give me all your..." Ronald gets out, pulls his own gun to defend himself.
Tyshell said that she put her head down and then heard a bunch of gunshots.
After the shooting stopped, she got out of the car and ran. She soon caught up with Malik. She believed Ali had been in her sedan and drove off, leaving them behind.
She says Malik tried calling Ali, but he didn't answer his phone. They walked around for a while, trying to gather themselves.
Ali eventually found them, although he was now driving another vehicle. He told Tyshell that he had ditched her car because he was afraid it would be connected to the crime.
He told her where her car was located, but he said that he had thrown her keys onto the freeway. The next day, she found her car where he said he had abandoned it. But since she didn't have the keys, she had it towed back to her house.
Police arrest Tyshell and book her on second-degree murder charges for helping set up the robbery of Ronald Hines that led to his murder.
Prosecutors aren't really sure that the charges against her will really stick. Tyshell claims that Malik's friend Ali was the mastermind of the plot, so police need to find him.
Tyshell Ellis Dorsey has admitted to police that she lied in her initial interview and that she was asked by her boyfriend, Malik Patterson, to participate in the robbery of Ronald Hines. But she also claims that it was Malik's friend, a man she knew only as Ali, who actually concocted the plan.
If Tyshell's story is true, then this makes this man Ali just as culpable in the murder. So police want to track him down.
The problem is that Tyshell has no way to contact Ali. She didn't know his phone number, and she only knew him through Malik and had met him for the first time at the motel party.
Tyshell describes Ali as a black male with a slender build. She believes he was around 24 years old.
Detectives knew there was some corroboration for Ali's existence. Surveillance videos show a man fitting that description at the motel party. And they knew someone drove Tyshell's sedan from the gas station after the shooting.
Tyshell's actions after the shooting suggest that someone took her car and abandoned it, discarding the keys. The fact that she had to have her car towed back home the next day solidifies all of this.
But Malik Patterson, when questioned by detectives, made no mention of a friend at the motel party.
Not mentioning Ali could have just been a reluctance on the part of Malik to get his friend involved in the investigation.
So at this point, detectives think that Tyshell might be trying to minimize Malik's involvement in all of this. And so if she can try to take some of the blame off of him by creating this mastermind, then maybe things will go a little better for him.
Tyshell didn't want to lose Malik. She wanted to be loved. She wanted to hold on to this relationship. So it made sense to point the finger at someone else.
Police and investigators were never able to determine if Ali was the one who suggested robbing Hines, or if he was simply the getaway driver. And since they couldn't locate him, they decided to move forward with the case against Tashelle and Malik.
Prosecutors convinced Tashelle Ellis Dorsey and Malik Patterson to forego a trial and take a plea deal. On August 9, 2024, they each plead guilty to one count of second-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, Tashelle expresses regret to the family of Ronald Hines.
I think she, felt a lot of guilt over it. She talked about, the grief that she's faced in her own life, how she had lost her father at a young age. She was just, very remorseful over the fact that she had contributed to anything that could give a family the kind of, trauma that she had felt in her own life from losing her father.
I believe her greatest nightmare happened in front of her eyes, of depriving children of their father. And it's something she's going to regret for the rest of her life and something she's going to think about for the rest of her life.
Tashelle, who had no prior criminal record, is sentenced to 10 years in prison. At Malik Patterson's sentencing hearing, he blames the robbery of Ronald Hines on his friend, Ali, who had fled the state.
He took responsibility for his role in the shooting, but plainly stated it was not his idea. And he also apologized to the family of Ronald Hines.
He clearly said he felt bad about what had happened, and, was apologetic to the family, but I think it just wasn't as heartfelt as what Tashelle had to say.
Malik Patterson is sentenced to 18 years for his role in the murder. Some believe he should have paid a higher price.
You pulled the trigger. You set it up. We watched you on camera shoot that man in the back of his head. No, 18 years isn't enough. I don't believe in the death penalty. I do believe in sitting in a cell and being forced to think about your actions and how you affected those people. 18 years is not enough for what he did.
Malik Patterson blames his actions that night on a spiral that began with the death of his grandfather, who he called his best friend just a few weeks earlier. He also said he had just lost a close friend of his who had just committed suicide. The deaths of people so close to him had caused him to lose himself and commit a crime that he now regrets.
Those close to Tashelle believe her biggest mistake was her inability to say no to a man she was too eager to have a relationship with.
I think she just really wanted to be loved, and not that her family didn't love her, but, she wanted that, I want to go on social media and show my man, and, I think she was just missing that, and she wanted it so bad that she just, anybody could have came along and swept her off her feet.
She said, I just wanted to be accepted. I felt like I was out of place. I just wanted somebody to accept me for that. So I said, yes. And I said, I get that. But when things are going towards robberies, when things are going towards clearly illegal things, you cannot do that. You have to think for yourself.
The winter wind in Chicago does not simply blow. It sweeps off Lake Michigan like a frozen blade, howling through the grid of concrete towers, rattling the iron elevated train tracks, and burying the city's darkest history under sheets of unyielding, dirty ice. In December of 1991, beneath the chaotic, smog-choked rush of a metropolis locked in political warfare and economic transition, an absolute horror was buried so deeply into the urban landscape that everyone assumed the concrete had sealed it away forever. It began not with a public shooting or a visible street execution, but with an eerie, total vanishing that sent a violent tremor straight through the highest corridors of Cook County power. A black luxury sedan, Its engine left idling helplessly under the flickering sodium lights of a vacant industrial lot near the Calumet River, sat covered in a fine layer of soot. The driver's side door was left wide open, swinging weakly against the freezing gale. On the passenger's seat lay a leather briefcase, a half-eaten sandwich, and a cellular phone that continuously beeped with unanswered alerts. But 26-year-old investigative journalist Diana Vance was completely gone. She was a rising star in the city's media landscape, a relentless investigator whose front-page exposes were systematically unearthing the multi-million-dollar corruption schemes connecting City Hall to the local construction cartels. She was not a runaway. She was a woman of fanatical structure, a professional who never missed a broadcast deadline, checked her sources twice, and never left her apartment door unbolted. When her editor flagged her absence 12 hours later, the Chicago Police Department didn't just find an abandoned vehicle, they stepped into a structural vacuum. There was no blood, no signs of a physical struggle, no shattered glass, and no frantic ransom notes left behind on her answering machine. It was a phantom abduction, a crime so perfectly, surgically executed that the Homicide Bureau stood entirely paralyzed before the void for 35 agonizing years. The headlines slammed onto the front pages of the Chicago Tribune and the Sun-Times with a blunt violence that mirrored the city's rough reputation. The Calumet River vanishing, Homicide Bureau mystified, the missing voice of truth. Every political operative, every construction tycoon, and every backroom power broker became a target of burning, whispered suspicion, causing the city's ruling elite to lock their private office doors, scrub their financial ledgers, and eye their closest allies with a corrosive, mutual distrust. The golden hours of the initial search sequence bled into frantic weeks, then into desperate, stagnant months, and eventually into the slow, agonizing crawl of a case turning completely cold. The files were bound in thick cardboard bindings, stamped with the tragic, definitive ink of a cold case, and carried down to the damp, fluorescent-lit basement archives of the Central Police Headquarters on Michigan Avenue, left to collect the fine, invasive dust of a changing century. 35 years of absolute, suffocating silence. 35 years of a father dying with his eyes fixed on an empty telephone, of a newsroom legacy fractured by unanswered questions, and of veteran detectives retiring with the burning sting of an unpunished evil weighing heavily on their souls. The world moved on, radically transformed by glass architectural marvels, fiber-optic algorithms, and the fast-paced rush of the digitized era. The industrial lots along the river were redeveloped into high-end luxury condominiums. Diana's contemporary generation faded into old age, and the name Diana Vance became a tragic piece of local news folklore, a cautionary tale whispered by young reporters in old press bars about the lethal cost of asking the wrong questions in the Windy City. But secrets buried beneath the foundation of institutional power have a violent, explosive way of demanding light when the systems that protected them begin to fracture from within. The turning point did not come from an accidental jailhouse informant or a sudden discovery in a shallow grave. It came from a microscopic piece of digital data unearthed during a federal forensic audit of a defunct union pension fund in 2026. A hidden ledger, encrypted within an ancient mainframe server that had sat untouched since the early 90s, revealed a sequence of untraceable cash payments routed through offshore accounts to a private security firm. The digital trail did not just shock the community, it shattered Chicago's modern political history, linking a high-profile, sitting state senator, a man celebrated as a progressive icon, a pillar of civic philanthropy whose legislation defined modern city development, directly to the logistics of that 1991 disappearance. The realization tore through the city like a kinetic blast, revealing that the monster had never been a street-level phantom passing through the night, but had built his entire political dynasty on top of a silent execution, breathing the crisp Chicago air as a free and worshipped leader, while his victim remained a forgotten ghost in the dark. To understand the crushing magnitude of the digital breakthrough that unsealed this nightmare in 2026, the mind must peel back 35 years of architectural and cultural evolution, descending directly into the grit, grease, and industrial smog of Chicago in December 1991. The city during this era was a hyperpolarized battleground of old-world political machines and a new wave of aggressive, white-collar corporate redevelopment. Vast swaths of the Old South Side and the industrial riverfronts were being systematically cleared, their rusted iron yards and derelict brick factories flattened to make way for multi-million-dollar commercial plazas. It was a gold rush for developers, but beneath the glossy architectural blueprints lay a subterranean layer of institutional rot. Union pension funds were being utilized as private checking accounts by political operatives, municipal construction contracts were being rigged in backroom steakhouses, and anyone who attempted to interfere with the flow of this dark capital was playing a lethal game with the true rulers of Cook County. Diana Vance understood the dangers of the city better than most. At 26, she possessed an old-school journalistic methodology that relied on shoe leather tracking, physical ledgers, and cultivation of deep-cover whistleblowers within the municipal bureaucracy. She did not write gossip column pieces or lifestyle profiles. She was a core investigative reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times, a woman whose typewriter ribbon was treated as a weapon by the corrupt actors she tracked. For 6 months prior to her disappearance, Diana had been quietly assembling an expansive, multi-tiered file on the Calumet River Redevelopment Initiative, a massive, state-subsidized infrastructure project designed to transform hundreds of acres of marshy industrial land into a premier commercial shipping hub. Her sources had dropped a devastating hint. Over $15 million in state development bonds had vanished into a labyrinth of shell corporations owned by prominent members of the city council. The night she vanished, December 12, 1991, was defined by a brutal, blinding blizzard that systemically choked the transit arteries of the city. The snow fell in heavy, horizontal sheets, turning the illuminated concrete towers of the Loop into dim, ghostly monoliths. Diana had left the Sun-Times newsroom on North Wabash Avenue at precisely 7:45 p.m., telling her editor, a cynical, tobacco-stained veteran named Arthur Pendleton, that she was driving south to meet a high-level source who promised to deliver the original bank routing numbers linking the embezzled state bonds to a private account in the Cayman Islands. She climbed into her black mid-sized sedan, her tires spinning weakly against the rising snow on the asphalt, and disappeared into the gray, freezing gloom of the expressway. When her vehicle was discovered 14 hours later by a pair of city sanitation workers, the scene was deeply chilling because of its absolute stillness amid the roaring wind. The sedan was parked in a vacant, gravel-covered lot beneath the massive iron shadow of the Calumet River Lift Bridge, an isolated industrial dead zone surrounded by rusted scrap heaps and stagnant chemical storage tanks. The vehicle's engine was still ticking over smoothly in neutral, the heater blasting warm, dry air into an empty cabin, and the fuel tank was less than a quarter full. The driver's side door was swung wide open, allowing the drifting snow to coat the black vinyl interior in a fine, white sheet of ice. Diana's leather briefcase, containing her notepad, her recording microcassettes, and her personal identification, was resting on the front passenger seat alongside an untouched turkey sandwich wrapping. But Diana had vanished without a single footprint left in the shifting, white expanse outside. The initial forensic investigation, led by Central Homicide Detective Ray Fletcher, was a primitive exercise paralyzed by the extreme weather conditions and the technical limitations of the early 90s. The horizontal snow and the sub-zero temperatures had completely obliterated any trace tire tracks, boot prints, or foreign biological material that the perpetrator might have left behind on the gravel or the vehicle's exterior panels. The crime scene technicians dusted the interior of the sedan for latent fingerprints using traditional black carbon powders, but the high humidity from the blast heater combined with the freezing air had caused the moisture to crystallize over the surfaces, smudging any usable ridge details. They lifted dozens of partial prints, but when processed through the manual card catalog archives of the Cook County Sheriff's Department, every single print belonged to Diana herself or her colleagues who had ridden in the car days prior. The behavioral profile of the victim completely rejected the narrative of a voluntary flight or a sudden, desperate suicide. Diana was a woman of fierce professional pride, fiercely dedicated to her family, and she was less than 48 hours away from publishing an expose that would have redefined her entire career. She had no history of substance dependencies, no hidden financial debts, and her personal diary, recovered from her North Side apartment, detailed a young woman entirely focused on the future. Detective Fletcher was forced to a dark, unyielding conclusion. Diana Vance had been lured to that isolated industrial lot by someone she considered an unassailable source, someone whose identity was so powerful that she didn't hesitate to step out of her vehicle into the freezing dark to receive the final pieces of her evidence puzzle. The investigation quickly became a political minefield that threatened to ignite the city's ruling infrastructure. Detective Fletcher and his team spent weeks cross-examining every member of the Calumet Development Task Force, searching through real estate registries, municipal bond allocations, and union labor rosters. The pressure from the Vance family and the media unions was overwhelming. The Sun-Times ran a continuous, front-page ticker tracking the number of days since their reporter had vanished, offering a $250,000 reward for any information that could break the silence. But every lead evaporated into the freezing air of the city. Witnesses within City Hall suddenly experienced profound memory failures. Documents concerning the escrow accounts were declared missing due to a timely water pipe burst in the municipal archives, and the line of questioning began to encounter a wall of absolute, institutional resistance. Among the individuals interviewed during those first frantic weeks of the search sequence was a 34-year-old rising star in the city's progressive political faction named Richard Sterling. Sterling was a charismatic, silver-tongued corporate attorney who had recently been appointed as the executive chairman of the Calumet Redevelopment Initiative. He was the golden child of the city's civic organizations, a man who gave passionate speeches about urban renewal, funded youth community centers on the West Side, and lived in a historic mansion in Hyde Park. When interviewed by Detective Fletcher inside his walnut-paneled office on LaSalle Street, Sterling was the absolute picture of a devastated public servant, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his voice carrying a deep, resonant sorrow. Diana Vance was a brilliant journalist, detective, Sterling had whispered, leaning forward over his mahogany desk, his expression a masterpiece of concerned empathy. She was tough, she was fair, and her questions forced our task force to maintain absolute transparency. We were working together to ensure that this project benefited the working-class families of Chicago, not the backroom developers. If someone has taken her to stop her reporting, they have committed an act of war against this city's democracy. I will instruct my legal staff to give you unrestricted access to our meeting minutes and correspondence files. His alibi for that Thursday night was considered rock solid by the primitive standards of 1991. He claimed he had been attending a private fundraising dinner for an orphanage at the Drake Hotel until 9 p.m., after which his personal chauffeur had driven him directly to his Hyde Park estate, where he spent the remainder of the night reviewing legislative drafts with two senior political consultants. The consultants verified his timeline under oath. The hotel logs showed his corporate vehicle clearing the valet station at 9:12 p.m., and in an era before automated license plate readers, cell tower pings, and dashboard cameras, there was no digital grid to challenge the validity of his movements. He was a highly respected, untouchable member of the civic elite, a man whose political trajectory was pointing straight toward the state capitol. He was filed away as a high-level cooperative witness, his name clean, his reputation unblemished, while the investigation began its slow, agonizing descent into a total, stagnant freeze. As the months bled into years, the frantic energy of the search sequence began to curdle into an administrative paralysis. The Calumet River was dredged twice by police dive teams, their heavy iron hooks pulling up rusty machinery, stolen vehicles, and industrial debris from the muddy bottom, but the water refused to surrender a single scrap of Diana's clothing or her remains. The case file grew increasingly heavy, filling 3 cardboard archive boxes that were eventually carried down to the cold, fluorescent-lit basement vault of the Michigan Avenue headquarters. There they sat for over 3 decades, stamped with the definitive, tragic ink of a cold case, while the city above them moved on, its memory of Diana Vance systematically erased by the rapid, dawn-dap velocity of new scandals, new elections, and the transformative march of time. Diana's father, an old-school union carpenter named Thomas Vance, turned his grief into a quiet, obsessive madness. He refused to move from his small bungalow in Bridgeport, keeping the porch light burning every single night for 25 years like a solitary lighthouse waiting for a ship that had gone down in the deep sea. He spent his pension money on private investigators and title analysts, tracking the financial growth of the developers who had profited from the Calumet project, leaving handwritten notes in the margins of his daughter's old newspaper clippings. He died in 2016, his hands clenching an empty telephone receiver, his final words a whispered demand to his surviving son, David, to never let the police archive boxes be destroyed or forgotten. Meanwhile, Richard Sterling did not merely survive the shifting political tides of Illinois, he mastered them. Over the next 35 years, he used the massive corporate success of the Calumet shipping hub to build an unassailable political dynasty. He was elected to the state Senate in 1998, eventually becoming the chairman of the powerful Appropriations Committee, a position that gave him absolute, total control over the allocation of billions of dollars in state infrastructure funds. He became a progressive icon, a pillar of civic philanthropy whose name was carved in stone over the entrances of university libraries, community hospitals, and public parks. He sat on the boards of international foundations, rubbed shoulders with presidents, and was widely considered the elder statesman of the Midwestern political apparatus. He had compartmentalized the year 1991 so perfectly that it seemed to have been entirely erased from his history. What Sterling failed to calculate, what his immense political power and his walls of high-priced defense counsel could not protect him against, was the absolute, unyielding memory of a digital machine. In March of 2026, as part of a sweeping federal racketeering investigation into the collapse of a multi-state union pension fund, a team of forensic accountants from the FBI's cyber division seized a legacy mainframe server that had sat untouched in the climate-controlled basement of a defunct construction cartel warehouse on the west side. The server contained thousands of encrypted, legacy database files from the early 90s, files written in obsolete programming languages that the modern world had long forgotten how to read. Using advanced emulation software and modern cryptographic algorithms, the federal technicians cracked the ancient encryption protocols, unrolling a digital scroll of backroom financial transactions that had sat in the dark for 35 years. The ledger did not just show routine corporate bribes. It mapped out an intricate, highly illegal sequence of untraceable cash routing. In December of 1991, just 48 hours before Diana Vance vanished, a shell corporation controlled directly by Richard Sterling's campaign committee had transferred $250,000 to a private, off-the-books security firm staffed by disgraced former law enforcement officers. The memo line of that digital transaction, hidden within the encrypted subsectors of the legacy mainframe, contained a single, chilling numeric string: Redevelopment Site Alpha, Logistics Authorization 91-12. The digital trail had survived the passage of decades, a permanent genetic marker of an ancient crime that was about to rip Chicago's modern political history completely down to the bedrock. The high-definition digital decryption matrices running on the servers at the FBI's regional field office on Roosevelt Road did not just decode a forgotten piece of financial code. They dropped an architectural blueprint of state-sponsored violence directly into the hands of the Joint Federal-State Cold Case Task Force. For lead investigator Marcus Thorne, a man who had spent 25 years parsing the corporate psychology of the city's political machines, the results were both an administrative triumph and a gut-wrenching confirmation of a 35-year-old horror. The transaction data recovered from the legacy mainframe did not just implicate a shadow developer or a low-level union enforcer. It connected State Senator Richard Sterling, the progressive icon, the elder statesman of Illinois politics, the man whose legislative pen had signed the modern landscape of the city into existence, directly to the financial mechanism of an abduction. Thorne sat in a windowless briefing room, the walls lined with grainy, monochrome photographs from the 1991 crime scene on the Calumet Flats, juxtaposed against high-resolution, modern surveillance images of Sterling addressing a black-tie gala at the Navy Pier. The contrast was a chilling study in systemic compartmentalization. On the left, a snow-covered luxury sedan with its door flung open to a freezing gale. On the right, an impeccable, silver-haired patriarch smiling warmly beneath the crystal chandeliers of the city's ruling elite. For 35 years, Sterling had gone to sleep knowing he had committed the perfect structural execution, using his immense political power to bury the memory of the young journalist who had dared to audit his empire. He had built a dynasty of civic virtue on top of an execution ground, entirely oblivious to the fact that the digital matrix was quietly waiting to betray him. The routing sequence is absolute, Marcus, stated Special Agent Elena Cruz of the FBI's Cybercrimes Division, sliding a laminated data flow chart across the table. We traced the origin point to a blind accounts payable ledger inside the Sterling and Associates Charitable Trust dated December 10, 1991. The cash, $250,000, was moved through an offshore transit bank in Panama before being converted into 10 separate cashier's checks. Those checks were hand-delivered to Apex Security Solutions, a shadow corporate entity operated by two disgraced former Chicago police operatives who specialized in industrial logistics for the construction cartels in the late 80s. The timing isn't just a coincidence. The final payment cleared the registry at 2:15 p.m. on December 12th, exactly 5 hours before Diana Vance climbed into her car and drove south into the blizzard. And the memo line? Thorne asked, his eyes locked onto the digital numeric string glowing on the presentation screen. Our cryptanalysts broke the alphanumeric substitution code yesterday morning, Cruz replied, her voice flat, cold, and clinical. Redevelopment Site Alpha was the internal corporate designation for the old mid-century blast furnace complex located at the mouth of the Calumet River, the precise parcel of land that Richard Sterling's Development Corporation purchased from the state for $1 in January of 1992, just 3 weeks after Diana vanished. Logistics authorization was the internal administrative code for a permanent asset removal. He didn't just order a hit, Marcus. He ran it through his corporate expense registry like a routine construction cost. He treated the execution of an investigative reporter as a common zoning expense. But a financial transaction from 1991, no matter how politically devastating or mathematically unassailable, is an indirect link when presented before a federal magistrate. In a courtroom dominated by high-priced defense specialists, a legal team could easily argue that the funds were intended for legitimate private security services or that the shell company was manipulated by a subordinate without Sterling's personal knowledge or direct authorization. To secure a capital murder indictment that would survive an aggressive, multi-tiered suppression attack, Thorne needed a direct, physical tie connecting Sterling to the execution ground itself. They needed her body, they needed the weapon, or they needed the biological remnants of the crime, and they had to find it inside an urban landscape that had been redeveloped, paved over, and rebuilt through 3 decades of rapid civic expansion. The logistical deployment of a specialized forensic archaeological recovery team into the industrialized corridors of the South Side required an operation of absolute tactical secrecy. If Senator Sterling or his extensive network of political informants inside City Hall caught even a whisper of the state's intentions, a man of his immense structural influence could file an immediate emergency injunction, destroy any remaining parallel paper trails, or catch a private flight to a non-extradition country before a single officer could approach his residence. Thorne chose to bypass the local district precincts entirely, utilizing a specialized federal warrant executed under the authority of the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, allowing the task force to seize the target property under a federal security lockdown without prior notification to municipal authorities. At 4:30 a.m. on Tuesday, June 23, 2026, a convoy of 6 unmarked, heavy-duty utility trucks and a mobile command trailer slipped out of the federal garage on Roosevelt Road. The morning air was thick with a damp, oppressive fog that hung low over the Dan Ryan Expressway, turning the glowing crimson tail lights of the early commuter traffic into dim, bleeding streaks of light against the gray sky. The team did not wear traditional police uniforms or utilize marked emergency vehicles. They were dressed in the casual, industrial garments of civil environmental engineers, complete with safety vests, hard hats, and magnetic corporate decals on their truck doors advertising a fictitious soil toxicity assessment for the Environmental Protection Agency. Their destination was the old redevelopment site Alpha, now home to a sprawling, multi-million-dollar automated shipping and container logistics terminal operated by a subsidiary of Cross Holdings on the banks of the Calumet River. The old mid-century blast furnaces and brick casting houses of the 1991 landscape were entirely gone, replaced by a vast, monolithic plain of reinforced asphalt, high-intensity security lighting arrays, and towering robotic cranes that shifted international cargo containers from ships to rail lines 24 hours a day. It was a concrete fortress designed to withstand the heavy friction of global commerce, but beneath that 3-foot-thick layer of engineered stone lay the original soil of the old industrial dead zone. Thorne stepped out of the command truck, the cold river wind cutting through his heavy jacket, his eyes scanning the massive expanse of the terminal. Beside him stood Dr. Karen Vance, the senior forensic anthropologist who had spent her career reading the silent geometry of hidden graves. She carried a portable ground-penetrating radar, GPR, console, an advanced digital sensor array capable of emitting high-frequency electromagnetic pulses through concrete and asphalt to map subterranean anomalies with a structural deviation margin of less than half an inch. The 1991 blueprints show that the main casting house sat right here, Marcus, Dr. Vance said, pointing her digital tablet toward a massive, automated crane track that ran parallel to the river dock. Beneath this modern asphalt sits the concrete foundation of the old furnace pits. If the Apex security team brought her here during the blizzard, they wouldn't have dug a shallow grave in the frozen prairie dirt outside. It would have been too difficult, too visible. They would have utilized the existing structural layout of the industrial plant, specifically the open, subterranean maintenance tunnels or the deep, unlined basement vaults beneath the heavy machinery that were scheduled to be sealed with structural concrete fill just weeks later. The forensic team moved into position, establishing a hard, enclosed perimeter inside a temporary plastic weather dome that concealed their equipment from the eyes of the port workers and passing river traffic. For 6 hours, the operation was an exercise in absolute, scientific monotony. Dr. Vance walked in slow, synchronized grid lines across the asphalt, pushing the GPR antenna array across the polished stone surface like a lawnmower, her eyes fixed on a monitor that displayed a real-time, digital waterfall scan of the strata beneath their boots. The screen showed an infinite, flat cross-section of modern gravel, crushed limestone, and reinforcing steel rebar, a silent desert of modern construction that refused to show a single crack. Then, at 11:14 a.m., as the mechanical hum of the nearby container cranes peak-shifted into a loud roar, the GPR monitor emitted a sharp, high-pitched electronic tone that brought the entire team to an instant halt. "We have an anomaly, Marcus," Dr. Vance whispered, her fingers flying across the console to isolate the signal reflections. She highlighted a distinct, localized pocket of disrupted density located exactly 6 feet beneath the modern asphalt crust, positioned just inside the perimeter wall of the historical 1991 furnace foundation. It's a structural void within the old concrete fill layer. The signal returns show a vertical shaft, an old industrial drainage cistern that was skipped during the general demolition phase of '92. The asphalt above it is solid, but the space inside that cistern contains a highly anomalous mass showing a high-density core reflection that matches the structural signature of compressed leather, synthetic fibers, and a metallic composition. It's an intentional encapsulation. "Bring in the diamond core drills," Thorne commanded, a wave of cold, burning adrenaline washing over him as he reached for his communication microphone. "Quietly, no jackhammers." We cut a clean, 12-inch circular course straight down through the asphalt to clear a path for the fiber-optic search cameras. Let's see what Richard's Sterling buried beneath the stock. The extraction technicians moved with fluid, clinical speed, positioning a heavy, water-cooled rotary core drill over the anomaly coordinates. The machine whined with a high-pitched, metallic screech as its diamond-tipped blade bit into the reinforced concrete, throwing up a fine spray of gray slurry that smelled of crushed limestone and old water. For 20 minutes, the drill descended through the layers of time, cutting through the modern 2012 asphalt, the 1992 infrastructure gravel, until the technicians suddenly felt the pressure release with a soft, hollow thud. The bit had breached the ceiling of the forgotten cistern. Thorne stepped forward, holding a flexible, high-definition digital inspection camera equipped with a high-intensity ultraviolet light ring. He lowered the long, black cable down through the core hole, his eyes fixed on a high-resolution portable monitor that sat on the folding table behind him. The camera descended through the dark shaft, passing through 6 feet of empty air before its lenses finally stabilized over the floor of the subterranean chamber. The air inside the cistern was stagnant, dry, and entirely devoid of atmospheric circulation, a preservation vault that had been hermetically sealed from the outside world for 35 years. As Thorne adjusted the focus adjustment on the camera console, the ultraviolet light illuminated the interior space, casting a long, violet wash across a sight that caused Detective Miller to let out a low, shuddering breath, his hand clenching the edge of the table until his knuckles turned a bloodless white. Resting against the moldering brick wall of the old cistern sat a massive, industrial-grade plastic transport container, a heavy, vulcanized polymer drum used by chemical plants in the late 20th century to transport corrosive acids. The lid of the drum was sealed with a thick layer of industrial marine epoxy and reinforced with several wraps of heavy steel cable that had oxidized into a dark, rusted red color over the decades. But it wasn't the container itself that froze the team. It was what sat on top of the sealed lid. Placed dead center on the polymer surface, like a deliberate signature left by an executioner who believed he would never be held to account, sat a vintage, 1991 manual press badge, its plastic laminate yellowed and cracked by the passage of time, but the bold, black lettering still completely legible under the ultraviolet light. Chicago Sun-Times, Diana Vance, Investigative Bureau. "We located her, Marcus," Dr. Vance said, her voice dropping into a low, trembling thread that carried the absolute gravity of a historical verdict. She looked up from the monitor, her face pale beneath her hard hat. "The packaging is completely uncompromised. The polymer drum has protected the contents from the environmental humidity and the river water for 35 years. It's a pristine forensic capsule. Everything he tried to hide is sitting inside that cylinder, right beneath our feet." "Mobilize the heavy lift team," Thorne ordered, his voice dropping into a hard, quiet whisper that carried the absolute finality of the state's power. He turned to Miller, his eyes burning with a fierce, uncompromised intensity. "Contact the federal district attorney and tell them to file the electronic capital indictment immediately. Secure the arrest warrant for Richard Sterling. We take him today, in his office at the state capitol, while he's surrounded by his staff and his cameras. Let's show this city that its king is out of options." As the plumbing trucks and the heavy winches began to position themselves over the core hole to lift the heavy polymer drum out of the dark, State Senator Richard Sterling was sitting at his walnut desk in Springfield, adjusting his tailored silk tie as his press secretary prepared the room for a live television interview regarding his new urban infrastructure bill. He had no inkling that the microscopic remnants of his 1991 campaign checkbook were currently being paired with a physical drum pulled out from beneath a shipping dock, about to rip his entire political dynasty down to the bedrock. The biological and digital clock had officially reached its final countdown, and the illusion of his absolute safety was about to shatter into a million jagged pieces. The midday sun over the Illinois state capitol in Springfield did not radiate warmth. It hung in a bleak, limestone sky like a cold white coin, casting long, sharp shadows across the Grand Plaza, where statues of historical lawmakers stood as silent guardians of institutional power. At 1:15 p.m. on Tuesday, June 23, 2026, the quiet, legislative elegance of the Capitol's South Wing was completely undisturbed by the brewing tectonic storm. Lobbyists in bespoke wool suits paced the marble rotunda, their voices echoing in soft, confidential murmurs against the soaring stained-glass dome, while staffers carried thick bundles of legislative dockets between the walnut-paneled hearing rooms. Inside Executive Suite 402, State Senator Richard Sterling was the absolute picture of unassailable political majesty. He sat behind a massive, antique mahogany desk, adjusting his tailored silk tie, his silver hair perfectly catching the soft, recessed lighting as his press secretary gave a final countdown signal to a live television crew from Chicago. Sterling was a master of the camera, a veteran politician who had spent 35 years transforming his image from a ruthless Cook County operator into a progressive elder statesman, a champion of urban infrastructure whose face was synonymous with civic virtue. He smiled warmly, leaning toward the television lens with an air of relaxed, grandfatherly authority. He had no inkling that while he was preparing to pitch a multi-billion-dollar transportation bill to millions of viewers, a joint federal-state tactical enforcement column was currently clearing the Capitol's security perimeter gates. The illusion of his absolute safety, built over 11,850 days of absolute evasion, was about to collide with a wall of tactical body armor and high-definition forensic data. 3 blocks away, inside a dark, unmarked command van parked along Monroe Street, lead investigator Marcus Thorne adjusted his radio earpiece, his eyes fixed on a bank of digital monitors tracking the Capitol's internal security feeds. Beside him sat FBI Special Agent Elena Cruz, her gloved fingers resting flatly on a leather folder containing the federal arrest warrant for first-degree capital murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and the unlawful concealment of human remains. The warrant was signed just 90 minutes prior by a federal magistrate in Chicago, following the unearthing of the vulcanized polymer acid drum from beneath the Calumet River shipping dock. The state's legal net was completely solid, and the operational choreography was timed down to the exact second. The Springfield Tactical Unit is in position at the north and south rotunda exits, Marcus. Agent Cruz reported, her voice flat, cold, and entirely stripped of professional hesitation. She checked her tactical tablet, which displayed the real-time location of Sterling's private security detail inside the building. We have a hard perimeter around the 4th floor. Sterling's personal vehicle has been blockaded in the executive parking deck by 2 unmarked federal utility trucks. He has 0 exit options left on the board. The live television broadcast just went on the air. He's speaking right now. We don't wait for the interview to conclude, Elena, Thorne stated, his jaw set into a rigid, unyielding line of operational focus as he checked the magazine of his service weapon with a sharp, mechanical click. A man of his profound narcissism will attempt to use that live television camera as a shield. He will try to frame his arrest as a partisan conspiracy or a deep state hit to rally his base before we can even get the irons on his wrists. We've reached the suite now, mid-broadcast, in front of his staff, his cameras, and his viewers. We show the state of Illinois that its elder statesman is a common felon caught in a 40-year-old trap. Thorne pushed the van's side door open, stepping out into the crisp, dry central Illinois air. He was flanked by 6 special agents from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit and 4 tactical operators from the Illinois State Police, all dressed in matte black tactical vests, their badges displayed prominently over their chests, their hands resting near their holsters. They did not sprint or shout as they crossed the marble plaza. They moved with a slow, heavy, and terrifyingly deliberate cadence that signaled the absolute authority of the state. They entered the Capitol through the executive transport entrance, bypassing the public metal detectors as the legislative security detail, notified of the federal RICO warrant just minutes prior, stepped back from their stations in a state of absolute, pale-faced shock. The ascent to the 4th floor inside the wood-paneled elevator felt like a slow, pressurized countdown to a historical execution. When the heavy bronze door slid open, the corridor of the south wing was silent, save for the distant, muffled sound of Sterling's rich, resonant baritone echoing from the speakers of a television monitor inside a staffer's office. Thorne led the tactical stack down the hall, their combat boots producing a sharp, rhythmic thud against the polished terrazzo tiles that shattered the quiet, bureaucratic atmosphere of the floor. When they reached the double oak doors of Suite 402, Sterling's chief of staff, a sharp, expensive-looking political consultant named Robert Vance, stepped out from the reception desk, his face instantly draining of color as he looked at the array of tactical body armor and federal shields blocking his space. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Vance demanded, his voice trembling slightly despite his calculated corporate posture. He attempted to stand directly between Thorne and the interior office doors. Senator Sterling is currently in the middle of a live, high-priority broadcast with the Chicago News Bureau. You cannot bring armed units into a legislative suite without prior clearance from the Senate Sergeant at Arms. I demand that you clear this hallway immediately. Step away from the door, Counselor, Thorne replied, his voice dropping into a stone-cold, unyielding whisper that carried the absolute finality of a death sentence. He reached into his vest, pulling out the hard copy of the capital indictment and holding it just inches from the consultant's face. This is a federal capital warrant issued under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, charging Richard Sterling with the 1990s execution of Diana Vance. If you take one more step, or if you attempt to touch that door handle to alert the suspect, I will arrest you on the spot for felony obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact to a capital homicide.
Move. Now.
The chief of staff froze, his hands dropping weakly to his sides, his mouth opening in a silent, paralyzed expression of total surrender as Agent Cruz brushed past his shoulder, her hand gripping the brass handle of the interior office door. She pushed the door open smoothly, stepping past the threshold into the main executive office. The room was expansive, bathed in the natural light of a massive arched window that looked out over the Capitol dome. In the center of the space stood 2 television camera towers, their high-intensity studio lights throwing a blinding, white glare across Sterling's mahogany desk. The reporter, a well-known political anchor from Chicago, was in the middle of asking a question about infrastructure bonds when the tactical stack flooded into the room, their black boots fanning out across the thick Persian carpet to form a hard perimeter around the desk. "Hey, what the hell is this? Cut the feed. Cut the feed," the television director shouted from behind the monitor console, his voice cracking with a sudden, chaotic panic as the cameramen instinctively swung their lenses away from the senator to capture the tactical intrusion. "Keep the feed live," Thorne commanded, his voice striking the studio air with the force and clarity of a gunshot, instantly freezing the television crew in their tracks. He stepped into the center of the studio lights, his eyes locked onto the face of Richard Sterling. "Keep every camera running. Let the city of Chicago see exactly what its infrastructure looks like." Behind the mahogany desk, Richard Sterling did not erupt into a panicked scramble. The transformation was chillingly subtle, a masterclass in sociopathic self-control. The easy, grandfatherly smile didn't shatter. It simply hardened into a cold, frozen mask of absolute arrogance. His silver-rimmed glasses caught the white glare of the studio lights as he slowly leaned back in his leather chair, folding his thin, manicured hands together over his chest. His breathing remained deep, measured, and rhythmic, his pupils tracking the positions of the tactical operators with an analytical precision that belonged to a seasoned corporate trial lawyer. "Investigator Thorne," Sterling spoke, his voice retaining its rich, resonant baritone texture, completely devoid of any physical tremor or emotional panic. He looked at Thorne's badge, then at the federal shield surrounding him, and let out a soft, dismissive sigh that carried the immense, intolerable weight of his class privilege. "You have brought a tactical assault unit into the state capitol during a live broadcast. This is an egregious, unconstitutional violation of legislative immunity, a desperate, politically motivated stunt designed to grab a headline before the upcoming budget vote. If you have some administrative question regarding my campaign expenditures or my charitable foundation, your office knows my attorneys have always maintained an open line of communication. You are making a cataclysmic professional mistake. We aren't here for your campaign expenditures, Richard," Thorne said, stepping closer to the desk, his hand resting flatly on his holster, his eyes burning with a fierce, uncompromised intensity. He pulled the federal warrant from Cruz's folder and laid it down firmly onto the polished mahogany surface, right on top of the senator's pristine legislative notes. "We are here for Diana Vance. We pulled the acid drum out from beneath the Calumet shipping dock at dawn, Richard. We broke the marine epoxy seal. We found her press badge, Richard. The one you left on top of the container like a signature. And we found her remains. The game is over, Senator. The concrete just gave her back." The name hit the elderly politician like a physical kinetic charge. For the first time in his 35-year career, a visible crack appeared in Sterling's armor. The skin around his jaw tightened for a brief, imperceptible millisecond, the color draining from his face to leave his skin a dull, chalky gray beneath his television makeup. His chest stopped rising, a sudden, complete cessation of oxygen intake that lasted for 2 full seconds before his calculated discipline forced his lungs back into a normal rhythm. He looked down at the federal warrant, his eyes skipping past the legal jargon to lock onto the bold, black text. Victim, Diana Vance. Charge, capital murder. Diana Vance, Sterling repeated, his voice dropping into a flat, toneless whisper, as if he were practicing the pronunciation of a word he hadn't spoken aloud since December of 1991. He looked back up, his pale blue eyes holding an unyielding, chilling emptiness that held no human empathy, no regret, and no morality. Only a cold, burning fury for the machine that had finally outsmarted him. You have an old rumor, investigator. You have a piece of local news folklore from 35 years ago. You cannot connect a discarded chemical drum to my hand or my office. I was a respected civic leader in '91. I was attending a charitable gala at the Drake Hotel on the night she disappeared. My timeline is an ironclad matter of historical record. Your timeline is built on top of a fraudulent campaign ledger, Richard. Agent Cruz interrupted, stepping forward to place a secondary stack of documents on the desk, the decrypted forensic printouts from the FBI's cyber audit. The Drake Hotel logs show your car clearing the valet at 9:12 p.m. But the encrypted Union Pension database we seized from the West Side warehouse last week tells the true story. At 9:45 p.m. on December 12, 1991, a shell corporation controlled directly by your private signature transferred $250,000 to Apex Security Solutions, the shadow enforcement firm operated by your personal fixers. The memo line contained the coordinate index for redevelopment site Alpha, the exact drainage cistern where we found her body this morning. You didn't stay at your Hyde Park estate, Senator. You drove south into the blizzard to watch your fixers roll that drum into the hole. The revelation hit the interior of the legislative suite like a kinetic blast. Sterling's fingers, which had been resting casually on his chest, clenched tightly into the fabric of his tailored wool suit jacket, his knuckles turning a stark, bloodless white. His mind was racing, calculating, realizing that his 35-year-old arrogance had left a digital paper trail he had completely forgotten existed. He had thought himself an unassailable ghost, an invisible force that had executed a perfect structural crime and buried it beneath a multi-million-dollar shipping hub. But the digital machine had preserved every byte, every routing sequence, every administrative check, waiting for a generation of investigators who knew how to turn his own corporate data into a cage. You have numbers on a page, Sterling whispered, his voice losing its smooth, melodic texture, turning rough, jagged, and cold. He stood up slowly from his leather chair, his physical posture remaining straight and regal despite the orange jumpsuit that was waiting for him in his immediate future. He looked directly into the lenses of the television cameras, which were still broadcasting his unmasking live to the entire state of Florida and Illinois. This is a fabrication. A desperate manipulation of obsolete banking records by a federal task force to destroy a progressive legacy. I deny these charges. I deny them completely. My legal team will have this warrant thrown out before the sun goes down. Your legal team can't file an injunction against a diamond core drill, Richard, Thorne said, his voice dropping into a low, terrifying whisper that carried the absolute finality of fate. He stepped behind the mahogany desk, grabbing Sterling's right wrist with a violent, controlled force that broke through his patrician defense. Turn around, Senator. Hands behind your back. The legislative session is officially over. Sterling didn't offer physical resistance. He slowly turned his back to the television cameras, placing his hands behind his waist with a calm, deliberate compliance that felt more insulting than an act of physical violence. He was still attempting to control the narrative, still trying to dictate the energy of his own submission for the viewers watching at home. Thorne pulled his heavy stainless steel handcuffs from his tactical belt, wrapping the cold metal around the politician's flesh and snapping the first cuff shut with a sharp, definitive click that resonated through the entire executive suite. The second cuff followed instantly, locking the elder statesman's hands together in a metallic embrace that broke his 35-year run of absolute freedom. "Richard Sterling, you are under arrest for the capital murder of Diana Vance," Thorne read, his voice clear, strong, and carrying the absolute weight of an unpayable historical debt being paid in full. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." As the Miranda warnings filled the studio air, the tactical operators stepped back, forming a tight escort corridor around the desk. Sterling walked between them, his head held high, his silver hair immaculate, his posture as straight and regal as if he were walking down the aisle of a Supreme Court session to take an oath of office. He didn't look at the floor. He didn't cover his face from the media lenses that were tracking his descent. He walked out of the legislative suite, out of the life of luxury and prestige he had stolen, and into the freezing, waiting dark of the transport van, leaving behind an empty mahogany desk, an unplaced infrastructure bill, and a city that was about to wake up to a Chandong that would tear its modern political identity completely down to the bedrock. The transport van slammed through the rear iron gates of the Federal Holding Bureau on Clark Street, its armored chassis swinging hard as it descended into the subterranean concrete garage. By 3:15 p.m. on Tuesday, June 23, 2026, the clinical, controlled elegance of the tactical arrest in Springfield had triggered an institutional and media shockwave across the state of Illinois that felt less like a breaking news update and more like a localized nuclear detonation. The live television feed from Suite 402 had not merely recorded a standard public corruption arrest, it had broadcast the physical, unvarnished unmasking of the city's most protected political dynasty. Across every major network, cable news channel, and digital media stream, a single headline pulsed in relentless, alarming strokes of blinding white text. "Chicago cold case explodes. Senator Richard Sterling indicted for 1991 murder of Diana Vance. Forensic vault recovered from Calumet River." The juxtaposition was too grotesque for the public consciousness to absorb without an immediate wave of moral and political vertigo. Richard Sterling, the progressive icon whose legislative masterwork had signed the literal modern architecture of the city into existence, was currently being led down a concrete basement corridor under an armed federal marshal escort. At the exact same moment, 300 miles north, federal forensic archaeologists were staging a heavily fortified staging area around the Calumet shipping dock, preparing to transport the vulcanized polymer acid drum containing Diana Vance's remains to the Cook County Medical Examiner's high-security clean facility. The illusion of civic virtue and institutional stability had vanished within the space of a single legislative lunch hour, revealing that the shimmering towers of the modern city had been built on a foundation of hidden blood and state-sponsored silence. Inside the secure interrogation wing of the federal detention facility, the atmosphere was completely insulated from the chaotic media circus currently choking the streets of the loop above. The room was small, windowless, and cast in the harsh, flat glare of a single recessed LED panel that buzzed with a low-frequency electrical vibration. The walls were constructed of heavy, soundproofed poured concrete and painted a neutral, industrial gray designed to drain the psychological energy out of anyone trapped within its borders. In the center sat a solid steel table, bolted securely to the concrete floor, flanked by 3 rigid plastic chairs. On one side sat State Senator Richard Sterling, his tailored silk tie removed by the booking officers, his silver hair still perfectly combed back, his hands resting flatly on the cold metal surface. On the other side sat lead investigator Marcus Thorne and FBI Special Agent Elena Cruz. Between them sat a high-definition digital audio recorder, its small red light blinking rhythmically, a silent digital pulse tracking the seconds of a historic confrontation. For 20 minutes, the silence inside the room had been heavy, weaponized, and absolute. Thorne did not speak. He sat perfectly static, his arms crossed over his tactical vest, his eyes locked onto Sterling's face, allowing the cold, claustrophobic reality of the federal cage to press against the suspect's calculated, patrician ego. He knew that men of Sterling's profound, narcissistic structure, Predators who had spent decades being treated as untouchable elder statesmen despised silence above all else. To them, a lack of immediate attention was a denial of their historical importance, a rejection of the control they utilized to dominate their environment. Sterling sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the blank gray wall behind Thorne, his breathing deep, measured, and rhythmic, his hands completely steady against the metal table. He looked entirely unbothered, a man who truly believed his decades of political success made him fundamentally superior to the federal agents sitting across from him. Let the record show. Thorne finally spoke, his voice dropping into a flat, clinical baritone that carried zero emotional vibration. This is an interview with Richard Sterling, held at the Federal Detention Facility, Chicago Bureau of Investigative Operations. Present are lead investigator Marcus Thorne, FBI Special Agent Elena Cruz, and the suspect. Mr. Sterling has been advised of his constitutional rights, has signed the formal notification of counsel waiver, and has chosen to proceed with preliminary questioning without private defense specialists present in the room at this time. Sterling's mouth twitched slightly, a subtle, patronizing curling of his thin lips that signaled a profound, internal amusement. He slowly shifted his gaze from the wall, his piercing, pale blue eyes locking onto Thorne with an intensity that carried the immense, unearned weight of his class privilege. I signed your waiver, Investigator Thorne, because an innocent man has absolutely nothing to fear from the routine machinery of the law, Sterling said, his voice a smooth, resonant baritone that filled the small concrete room with an unearned authority. And I chose to sit here without a team of senior defense partners from my firm because I wanted to see exactly how far this grotesque administrative delusion extends. I know exactly what your task force thinks it achieved today in Springfield. You think a single string of numbers recovered from an obsolete union pension server gives you the right to dismantle a progressive legacy I have spent 35 years constructing for the working-class families of this state. You think you have trapped a monster. But what you have actually done is create an unprecedented civil liability for your respective departments. Your forensic miracle is a legal mirage. The routing sequence on that union pension server isn't a mirage, Richard. Agent Cruz interrupted, leaning forward until her forearms rested heavily on the steel table. We trace the origin point to a blind accounts payable ledger inside the Sterling and Associates Charitable Trust dated December 10, 1991. The cash, $250,000, was moved through an offshore transit bank in Panama before being converted into 10 separate cashier's checks. Those checks were hand-delivered to Apex Security Solutions, a shadow corporate entity operated by two disgraced former Chicago police operatives who specialized in industrial logistics for the construction cartels in the late 80s. The timing isn't just a coincidence. The final payment cleared the registry at 2:15 p.m. on December 12th, exactly 5 hours before Diana Vance climbed into her car and drove south into the blizzard. Explain that to me, Senator. How does your private charitable signature end up funding a cartel enforcement firm hours before an investigative reporter vanishes from the grid? Sterling leaned back in his plastic chair, folding his arms across his chest, his posture entirely relaxed, as if he were sitting in a leather armchair at his private club rather than an interrogation room facing a federal life sentence without the possibility of parole. A competent first-year law student could dismantle that question in 5 minutes, Agent Cruz, Sterling replied, his tone dripping with a smooth, educational condescension. In 1991, during the initial phase of the Calumet River redevelopment project, our task force was facing severe, continuous security threats from radical environmental factions and wildcat labor strikers who were actively sabotaging our construction equipment and threatening the safety of our engineering teams. The Sterling Charitable Trust contracted dozens of private security entities, corporate intelligence firms, and site surveillance specialists to protect our multi-million-dollar state-bonded investment. If Apex Security Solutions was one of those subcontractors, then their compensation was a routine corporate expenditure for industrial protection. To suggest that I personally authorized a capital crime based on a corporate banking registration file from 35 years ago is an absurd leap of speculative logic that no federal judge will ever allow near a jury box. Thorne didn't flinch. He expected this line of defense. He knew Richard Sterling would attempt to weaponize the chaotic corporate landscape of the early 90s to create a plausible explanation for the financial transactions. He reached into his leather folder, pulling out a series of large, high-definition glossy prints and sliding them across the table, lining them up neatly in front of the politician. The first photograph was a close-up of the vulcanized polymer acid drum pulled from the subterranean cistern beneath the Calumet shipping dock at dawn. The second photograph was a macro-lens shot of the 1991 manual press badge, its plastic laminate yellowed and cracked by the passage of time, showing the clear, bold lettering, Diana Vance, Investigative Bureau. The third photograph was the most devastating, a digital scan of the final pages of the decrypted Union pension ledger, highlighting a specific alphanumeric substitution code that had been broken by the FBI's cryptanalysts the morning before. "Let's talk about the logistics of that night, Richard," Thorne said, his voice dropping into a low, hypnotic register that forced Sterling's eyes down toward the images. "You are correct that Apex Security was a subcontractor for your development firm, but they didn't protect your equipment on December 12th. They set a trap. Diana Vance was a hypervigilant journalist. She didn't drive south into a historic blizzard to meet a common street source. She went to that vacant lot near the Calumet Lift Bridge because she believed she was meeting a senior executive who was ready to hand over the original bank routing numbers, linking your embezzled state infrastructure bonds to an offshore escrow account in the Cayman Islands. She thought she was securing the final piece of her expose. But when she opened her driver's side door, she didn't find a whistleblower. She found your fixers." Thorne tapped a finger firmly against the photo of the polymer drum. "They brought her to redevelopment site Alpha, the old mid-century blast furnace complex that your family's development corporation purchased from the state for $1 just 3 weeks later. They used a heavy, industrial-grade polymer acid drum to encapsulate her remains, sealing the lid with marine-grade epoxy and reinforcing it with steel cables. They dropped that cylinder down into a forgotten drainage cistern beneath the casting house foundation, assuming that when the general demolition crews poured 3 feet of structural concrete fill over the site in January of '92, the evidence would be locked in a dark vault until the end of time. An interesting piece of crime fiction, investigator," Sterling said, his voice retaining its smooth texture, though the pacing of his words slowed down significantly. His pale blue eyes remained fixed on the photograph of the press badge. But again, entirely circumstantial. Hundreds of laborers, demolition contractors, and site engineers had total access to that industrial complex during the redevelopment phase. To suggest that I personally engineered that disposal based on a geographic coordinate listed in an old ledger is an absurd leap of logic. You cannot link that physical container to my hand or my signature. We aren't relying on the ledger alone, Richard, Agent Cruz said, a grim, predatory smile spreading across her face as she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a secondary document, a certified copy of a state campaign finance registry printout dated December 14th, 1991. Let's talk about your personal movements during that blizzard. When Detective Ray Fletcher interviewed you 2 weeks after the disappearance, you stated under oath that you left the charitable gala at the Drake Hotel at 9:12 p.m., after which your personal chauffeur drove you directly to your Hyde Park estate, where you spent the remainder of the night reviewing legislative drafts with 2 political consultants. Do you remember giving that statement? I don't recall the specific chronological details of a routine interview I gave over 3 decades ago, Agent, Sterling replied coldly. But if I stated I was at my residence, then I was at my residence. That's unfortunate, Cruz said, sliding the campaign finance page across the metal table. Because at 9:45 p.m. on December 12th, 1991, the exact hour your campaign committee's Shell account initiated the electronic fund transfer to Apex Security, your personal corporate credit card was utilized to purchase 42 gallons of commercial-grade diesel fuel at an automated maritime service station located less than 3 blocks away from the Calumet Lift Bridge. The transaction logs show that the card required a unique, multi-digit security PIN code that was known only to one individual, you, Richard. Your chauffeur didn't drive you to Hyde Park. He drove your luxury sedan south into the industrial dead zone, tracking behind the tactical vehicle containing your fixers. You didn't stay home reviewing drafts, Senator. You stood on that gravel lot in a cashmere overcoat, watching your team roll that polymer drum into the open cistern because your entire political future depended on ensuring that Diana Vance never spoke to a grand jury. The revelation hit the interior of the interrogation room like a kinetic charge. Sterling's hands, which had been resting flatly on the steel table, tightened slightly, his fingers curling inward as his knuckles turned a stark, bloodless white against the metal. The legal and political armor he had spent 35 years constructing was meeting a wall of structural, electronic data that he had completely failed to calculate during the primitive landscape of 1991. He had thought himself an unassailable ghost, an invisible force who had executed a perfect, corporate crime and buried it beneath a multi-million-dollar shipping hub. But the system he despised had preserved every digital byte, every automated fuel transaction, every cryptographic routing sequence, waiting for a generation of federal investigators who knew how to turn his own administrative footprint into a cage. "You have a credit card slip from a defunct service station," Sterling whispered, his voice losing its smooth, resonant texture, turning rough, jagged, and cold. The silver-haired elder statesman vanished entirely within the space of 3 breaths, revealing the raw, unadulterated predator that had been nesting beneath his progressive legislation for his entire adult life. The emptiness in his eyes was total, a chilling void that held no human empathy, no regret, and no morality, only a cold, burning hatred for the machine that had finally outsmarted him. That is not identification. That is not identification of an execution. You cannot prove I was inside that casting house. You cannot prove I touched that cylinder. "We don't need to prove it to you, Richard," Thorne said, leaning forward until his face was just inches away from the politicians across the steel table. His voice was steady, quiet, and carried the absolute weight of a hammer striking an anvil. "We are going to prove it to 12 citizens of Cook County. We have your corporate signature on the offshore checks. We have your private security PIN code on the fuel logs. We have the physical container with your victim's press badge sitting on top of it. And we have the forensic archaeological mapping that proves the cistern sat directly beneath the parcel of land your company purchased for $1 3 weeks later. Your own chief of staff broke down in tears when he saw the digital scans downstairs, Richard. He realized that the progressive dynasty he had dedicated his life to serving was built on top of a secret slaughterhouse. The mention of his chief of staff finally shattered Richard Sterling's frozen composure. He didn't erupt into physical violence. Instead, his entire body went rigid, his jaw clenching so hard the muscles along his neck stood out like steel cables beneath his crisp shirt collar. The refined, aristocratic elder statesman vanished completely, replaced by the terrifying specter that had stood in the freezing dark of the Calumet Flats in 1991. "You think you've achieved something historic, don't you, Thorne?" Sterling whispered, his teeth bared in a sinister, empty grin that sent a primal shiver of dread through the room. "You come here with your cyber division, your digital files, and your modern federal task force, and you think you've won the game. But you haven't changed a single thing that matters in this city. For 35 years, I lived exactly the life I chose to live. I was the king of this state. Governors bowed their heads when I walked into the rotunda. Presidents took my phone calls. I shaped the literal skyline of Chicago. I sat at dinner tables with corporate tycoons and international financiers, and I enjoyed the luxury of absolute freedom while that little reporter was nothing but dust inside a plastic tube beneath a shipping dock. I won the game, investigator. I won it every single day for 3 decades. This isn't your victory. It's just the closing of an old account." Thorne stood up slowly, his chair producing a sharp, scraping sound against the concrete floor that shattered the dark atmosphere of the room. He reached down, picking up his leather folder and sliding the photograph safely out of sight, looking down at the politician with a profound, unyielding disgust. "The account isn't closed until the cell door clicks shut, Richard," Thorne said, his voice quiet, steady, and carrying the absolute finality of fate. "And you aren't going back to your executive suite in Springfield. You aren't going back to your historic mansion in Hyde Park. You are going to a maximum security tier at the federal penitentiary, where the walls are gray, the air is cold, and the silence lasts forever. Enjoy your progressive legacy, Senator. It's the last thing you're ever going to own. He turned the heavy brass handle of the security door, stepping out into the bright, frantic chaos of the booking room where Assistant State Attorney Victoria DeShazo was already surrounded by a battery of microphones, ready to announce to the world that the phantom of the Calumet had finally been broken. The media cameras flashed through the glass partitions, their bright lenses capturing the moment the cold case died and the long, agonizing march toward a final, historic trial began. The institutional tremor that radiated out from the subterranean interrogation wing of the federal detention facility on Clark Street did not merely disrupt the evening commute within the Loop. It physically fractured the structural myths upon which Chicago's modern political architecture had been built. By 5 p.m. on Tuesday, June 23, 2026, the strategic silence that traditionally protected backroom Cook County operations had been completely immolated by a relentless, dawn-dap firestorm of digital alerts, emergency broadcasts, and real-time legal updates. The city did not just read the news. It consumed the shockwave with a collective sense of moral vertigo. Across every news feed, transit monitor, and smartphone screen from the North Shore down to the industrial borders of Indiana, a single headline pulsed in continuous, alarming strokes of deep crimson text. Cook County Apocalypse. Senator Richard Sterling held without bail for 1991 execution of Diana Vance. Forensic techs breach sealed Calumet Acropolis. To a casual observer, the arrest of an elderly lawmaker might have resembled a standard, albeit tragic, conclusion to a historical true crime mystery. But to the collective consciousness of Chicago, Richard Sterling was not merely a politician. He was an economic and social landscape architect. He was the individual whose legislative maneuverings had controlled the flow of billions of dollars in public infrastructure grants, whose signature sat at the foundation of the city's modern lakefront redevelopments, and whose public face had been celebrated for 35 years as the absolute pinnacle of progressive civic virtue. He was the elder statesman who had delivered eulogies for labor leaders, funded minority youth academies on the West Side, and sat on the selection committees for federal judicial appointments. The realization that this revered patriarch was a cold-blooded saboteur, the literal monster who had orchestrated the 1991 slaughter of an investigative reporter to protect his original corporate real estate scam, was a truth so structurally grotesque that it threatened to pull the city's entire establishment down into the dirt. Inside the sprawling media center on the 5th floor of the federal building, the atmosphere had degenerated into a high-intensity, suffocating pressure cooker of modern investigative journalism. The specialized air conditioning units groaned helplessly against the intense, humid body heat generated by over 300 print, broadcast, and digital reporters who had crammed themselves shoulder to shoulder into the wood-paneled space. Camera operators waged a silent, brutal war for positioning along the elevated technical risers, their heavy iron tripods clinking aggressively against the floor tiles while a massive, tangled forest of microphones sprouted from the central briefing podium. The sound of high-speed digital camera shutters producing a continuous, mechanical clicking filled the room with an ambient static that resembled a sudden hail storm tearing through a pane of glass, cutting through the low, anxious hum of whispered telephone dictations. When Federal District Attorney Thomas DeShazo stepped up to the microphones, flanked by lead investigator Marcus Thorne, FBI Special Agent Elena Cruz, and the Regional Director of Public Safety, the sudden blast of electronic studio flashes was so intense it turned the podium into a blinding, whitewashed arena. DeShazo was a prosecutor who had spent 25 years navigating the high-stakes, lethal intersections of municipal corruption and corporate racketeering, but his face today was a grim, unyielding mask of absolute finality. He laid his hands flatly on a blue leather folder containing the multi-layered federal RICO indictment, adjusted his glasses, and looked directly into the glass lenses of the center television cameras that were broadcasting his statement live to a stunned international audience. "Good morning," DeShazo began, his voice carrying a sharp, driving resonance that instantly flattened the frantic room into a breathless, static silence. 35 years ago, the city of Chicago was marked by an act of absolute, calculated, and state-insulated violence. The disappearance of Diana Vance from a vacant industrial lot near the Calumet Lift Bridge in December of 1991 was not a random street tragedy, nor was it a robbery gone wrong. It was a structural execution, a cold-blooded silencing of a journalistic voice that had dared to audit the dark cash flows connecting City Hall to the construction cartels of that era. For more than 3 decades, the history books treated this vanishing as an unresolvable myth, a ghost story buried beneath the concrete foundations of our city's expansion. Today, the United States Department of Justice is here to declare that the concrete has officially given up its secrets. He paused, allowing his eyes to lock onto the front row of political columnists who sat frozen over their open notebooks. Earlier this afternoon, acting under the authority of a federal capital warrant issued under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, a joint task force took physical custody of State Senator Richard Sterling at his legislative offices in the state capitol. Mr. Sterling has been formally indicted for first-degree capital murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and the unlawful concealment of human remains. This indictment is supported by a comprehensive, unassailable matrix of digital financial routing and automated mercantile logs that place the suspect directly at the center of the execution logistics. Furthermore, at dawn today, forensic archaeological units successfully breached a forgotten drainage cistern beneath the old Calumet blast furnace foundation, recovering a pristine, vulcanized polymer chemical drum containing the physical remains of the victim, alongside her original 1991 press identification card. The law does not care how high a suspect's name is carved in granite over our public libraries. We do not care how many progressive bills an individual has signed into law, or how many millions of dollars his charitable foundations control. Justice is an absolute, unyielding arithmetic that eventually balances its ledger, no matter how deep the vault or how long the night. The state will move for absolute detention without bail. The moment DeShazo stepped back from the podium, the room exploded into a chaotic, screaming wall of sound, with dozens of journalists leaping onto their chairs, shouting questions about the involvement of the old construction cartels, the financial stability of the state's pension funds, and the reaction of the surviving Vance family. Investigator Marcus Thorne remained completely motionless behind the prosecutor, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes fixed on the back exit door. He wasn't listening to the media performance or the political rhetoric of the briefing. His mind was focused entirely on the immediate, savage legal warfare that was already developing in the federal clerk's office downstairs. Richard Sterling was not a common street offender who would sit passively in a federal tier while the state methodically prepared its trial sequence. He was a multimillionaire operator who possessed intimate, deep-cover connections to every elite legal mind in the state of Illinois. Even before the armored transport van had cleared the loop's subterranean expressway gates, Sterling's corporate defense apparatus had launched a massive, multi-tiered counteroffensive designed to neutralize the state's evidence before a single document could be presented to a trial judge. By 4:30 p.m., a defensive phalanx of 5 of the highest-priced, most ruthless criminal defense specialists in New England had materialized at the federal courthouse, led by senior trial counsel Harlan "The Iron Gate" Vance, no relation to the victim, an old-money defense titan known for dismantling capital prosecutions through brutal, microscopic attacks on police methodology and digital chain-of-custody protocols. Thorne walked down the long, echoing limestone corridor of the courthouse's 9th floor, his heavy combat boots producing a sharp, rhythmic thud that signaled his internal velocity. He pushed open the double doors of the task force's temporary command center, where Detective David Miller was surrounded by stacks of historical 1991 mapping dockets, industrial blueprints of the old Calumet casting houses, and a live monitor tracking the local political reactions. The television on the wall showed a live broadcast from the plaza outside City Hall, where groups of stunned citizens were gathering in silence, their faces illuminated by the amber glow of temporary votive candles that had been placed next to old photographs of Diana Vance. Harlan Vance just filed his initial emergency discovery and suppression demands with the circuit clerk, Miller said, looking up from his terminal as Thorne entered the room. His face was a pale mask of sheer physical exhaustion, dark circles swelling beneath his eyes from working 72 hours without a single interval of rest. He's already launching a massive, multi-pronged attack against our digital evidence, Marcus. He's filed affidavits from 2 independent software engineering firms claiming that the Union Pension server database we seized from the West Side warehouse is a corrupted, unverified legacy system that has suffered from 35 years of bit rot, software degradation, and systemic data manipulation. They're going to argue that the alphanumeric substitution code our cyber division broke is a completely arbitrary interpretation, a narrative forced onto an ancient, chaotic ledger by a desperate cold case task force to justify its federal budget allocation. A corrupted server doesn't generate a specific alphanumeric string that matches the exact coordinate matrix of a forgotten drainage cistern beneath an industrial foundation, David, Thorne said, his voice dropping into a hard, quiet whisper that carried the absolute finality of the state's power. He slammed his folder down firmly onto the central table. A corrupted server doesn't accurately pair a 1990s campaign finance transaction with an automated fuel slip from a maritime service station 3 blocks away from the abduction site. He didn't pull those data points out of a software glitch. He left them behind like footprints in the mud because in 1990s, he thought the digital machine was a toy that would never learn how to remember his history. Harlan Vance can hire every tech expert from MIT to Silicon Valley, but they cannot argue with the physical reality of that vulcanized polymer drum sitting in the medical examiner's vault right now. The physical corroboration is our absolute anchor. The defense isn't just attacking the tech, Marcus, Miller warned, turning his screen to show a draft of a public statement currently being distributed to the media by Sterling's Political Action Committee in Springfield. Look at the political narrative they are spinning. They are framing this arrest as an egregious, coordinated hit by federal agencies designed to disrupt the upcoming vote on the multi-billion-dollar transit bill. They are mobilizing the labor unions, the civic development boards, and the minority community foundations that Richard funded to put intense social pressure on the U.S. attorney to reduce the charges or grant a signature bond. They want him out of that cell before the weekend news cycle can solidify the image of his guilt in the public mind. We don't let them control the clock or the arena, David, Thorne said, his jaw clenching as he pulled a secure drive from his inner vest pocket. If Harlan Vance wants a suppression battle, we give him one, but we do it with the physical evidence laid out on the table in front of him. I want the deep core drilling logs from the shipping terminal certified by the federal archaeologists within the hour. I want the high-definition video of the cistern breach locked into our digital evidence ledger. We don't wait for Monday morning to seat a grand jury for the trial phase. We push for an emergency arraignment tomorrow at dawn, while the city is still watching the unmasking. While Thorne was managing the tactical perimeter of the command post, a secondary, equally dramatic sequence was unfolding at the Cook County Medical Examiner's high-security forensic pavilion on Harrison Street. The contrast between the chaotic, high-stakes legal warfare of the Loop and the cold, clinical isolation of the pathology laboratory was profound. The basement floor was washed in the harsh, mechanical hum of specialized air filtration systems and the blinding, clinical glare of high-intensity fluorescent lamps that left absolutely no room for human illusion or defensive spin. In the center of Autopsy Room 4 sat the massive, vulcanized polymer acid drum that had been lifted out from beneath the concrete shipping dock hours before. Senior medical examiner Karen Vance, Marcus's sister, a brilliant forensic pathologist who had spent her entire professional life decoding the silent, physical narratives of the dead, stood beside the steel table, clad in a heavy, level 4 protective garment, positive pressure hood, and double-layered nitrile gloves. She held a specialized, low-frequency oscillating surgical saw in her hand, its diamond-tipped blade prepared to cut through the hardened layers of marine epoxy and reinforced steel cables that had sealed the container for 35 years. Investigator Thorne stood behind the heavy, double-paned reinforced glass viewing partition, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes locked onto the black, chemical cylinder. The room inside smelled faintly of ancient river silt, ozone from the filtration units, and the sharp, chemical tang of the industrial polymer itself, a scent that carried the exact atmosphere of that frozen December night in 1991. The extraction is going to require an extraordinary degree of molecular patience, Marcus. Karen's voice came through the wall-mounted intercom speaker, sounding flat, analytical, and entirely detached from the political chaos of the courthouse. She adjusted her surgical visor, using a long pair of forceps to clear a layer of oxidized caliche dust from the top lid of the drum. The marine epoxy that Richard Sterling's fixers used to seal the cylinder was an industrial-grade polyurethane composite designed to withstand heavy chemical exposure. It has cured over 35 years into a hard, glass-like shell that has physically bonded with the polymer ridges of the drum itself. Every twist of the steel cable represents a deliberate manual compression, a physical signature of the force used by the Apex security operatives to ensure that this container would never leak or float to the surface if the cistern were flooded by the river. Can you confirm the structural integrity of the interior matrix, Karen? Thorne asked, his voice a low vibration against the glass. Yes, Karen replied, activating the surgical saw. The machine whined with a sharp, high-pitched metallic screech that filled the clean room as its blade bit into the cured epoxy seal, throwing up a fine, white cloud of dust that was instantly pulled away by the negative pressure ventilation ducts. The subsurface digital X-ray scans we ran an hour ago show that the interior of the drum was filled with an anhydrous chemical desiccant compound, a compound that completely absorbed the internal atmospheric moisture and prevented any liquid infiltration from the surrounding Calumet mud. It's an absolute preservation vault, Marcus. The low oxygen, low humidity environment has prevented the natural biological decomposition of the clothing fibers, the leather notes, and the human tissue. Everything he tried to bury is sitting inside this cylinder exactly as it was on December 12, 1990s. Using a pair of heavy-duty hydraulic spreaders, the technical team slowly pried the heavy polymer lid away from the drum's rim. The seal gave way with a loud, protesting snap that echoed through the entire laboratory like a gunshot, breaking a 35-year silence with a physical finality that caused Thorne to hold his breath behind the glass partition. As the lid lifted, the clinical light of the autopsy lamp shone down into the interior of the cylinder, illuminating a sight that caused the forensic technicians to step back in a state of sudden, absolute solemnity. Resting inside the chemical desiccant bed sat the perfectly preserved figure of Diana Vance, her dark winter coat still buttoned tightly against her throat, her hair retaining its youthful texture, her face frozen in the exact expression of sudden, unblemished confusion she had carried into the dark when the blast furnace complex became her tomb. Wrapped around her left wrist was a thin gold chain holding a delicate vintage watch, its mechanical hands permanently frozen at precisely 9:52 p.m., the exact minute Richard Sterling's corporate credit card cleared the automated fuel register down the street. The physical match is absolute, Marcus, Karen whispered, her voice losing its professional detachment, turning rough and heavy with emotion as she looked up at her brother through the glass window. The impact trauma along the posterior occipital region of the cranium shows a clean, linear compression matrix that matches a heavy, flat iron tool, an exact match for the tactical flashlights carried by the Apex security operatives in the early 90s. The bone holds onto the precise kinetic energy of the execution blow. He thought his wealth and his concrete fill would protect his name forever. But this table doesn't care about his progressive bills. This room doesn't care about his Senate chair. Diana Vance is speaking louder right now than she ever could on the front page of the Sun-Times in 1991. The ledger is officially complete. Thorne stepped back from the glass window, letting out a long, slow breath that carried 35 years of historical failure out of his chest. He left the medical examiner's facility, stepping out into the heavy, humid air of the Chicago evening. The traffic along Harrison Street was a solid, stagnant river of white headlights and red taillights, the city moving with its standard, chaotic rhythm, completely oblivious to the fact that its historical foundation had just been balanced on a stainless steel table beneath their feet. He climbed into his unmarked command sedan, putting the vehicle in gear and accelerating north toward the loop. He looked through his windshield at the glittering expanse of the skyline, the towering silhouettes of the corporate plazas, the high-end luxury condominiums lining the riverfront, and the grand limestone civic monuments that bore the names of the city's ruling dynasties. He realized that every light burning in those windows was an illusion. The families sleeping inside those high-end developments, the international financiers, leasing those glass offices, and the progressive institutions that prided themselves on their modern virtue were all living inside a structure built on top of a hidden slaughterhouse. The unmasking of Richard Sterling was not just the resolution of a cold case homicide. It was a total, systemic baseline shift that would force Chicago to look at its own wealth and its own history with a permanent sense of shame and suspicion. The phantom was broken, the trophies were secured, and the long, brutal march toward a final federal verdict had officially crossed the point of no return in a city that would never look at its own architecture the same way again. The heavy brass-reinforced doors of Federal Courtroom 14 North did not merely open. They groaned under the immense weight of an institutional crisis that threatened to pull the entire political establishment of Illinois down into the mud. At precisely 9 a.m. on Wednesday, June 24, 2026, the atmospheric pressure inside the oak-paneled chamber had reached a suffocating, volatile maximum. Every single spectator bench was packed shoulder to shoulder with senior legislative aides, corporate real estate executives, and veteran political strategists from Springfield, their faces uniform masks of pale, sleepless anxiety. Behind them, the media gallery resembled a dense, chaotic wall of lenses and screens, with national legal correspondents whispering frantically into encrypted digital audio links. The air was thick, smelling of old paper, damp wool coats, and the sharp, chemical tang of expensive floor wax that could not mask the raw scent of institutional panic. This was the formal arraignment and preliminary detention hearing for State Senator Richard Sterling. For 35 years, the 78-year-old politician had walked into public arenas as a king, flanked by private security details, greeted by standing ovations, and shielded by a multi-million-dollar public relations apparatus. Today, he entered the courtroom through the secure rear prisoner lockup door, his movements restricted by the heavy, mechanical clinking of a three-point steel restraint chain locked around his waist, wrists, and ankles. He was no longer wearing his custom-tailored wool suits or his signature silk ties. He stood before the bar of justice in a coarse, orange federal detention jumpsuit, his silver hair slightly unkempt from a night spent in a maximum security isolation cell, his skin appearing dull and bloodless beneath the harsh, unyielding fluorescent lights of the courtroom. Yet, despite the orange uniform and the physical weight of the steel chains, the calculated, sociopathic discipline of the politician had not entirely shattered. As Sterling took his seat at the defense table, his pale blue eyes swept across the gallery, mapping the faces of his political allies with a cold, piercing intensity that carried an implicit threat. He did not bow his head. He sat with his spine perfectly straight, his chin lifted with an air of absolute, unearned majesty that signaled his total refusal to surrender the narrative. Beside him stood his defensive phalanx, a $5 million array of white-collar litigation power led by senior trial counsel Harlan "The Iron Gate" Vance. Vance was a legendary, silver-haired master of the federal courts, a man whose career was built on the systematic destruction of state evidence and whose voice carried a booming, aristocratic authority that had rescued corporate titans and cartel associates from federal penitentiaries. Across the central aisle sat the federal prosecution team, commanded by District Attorney Thomas DeShazo and lead investigator Marcus Thorne. Between the two tables sat the focus point of the entire litigation, a large, high-definition presentation monitor that currently displayed a digital image of the frozen gold wristwatch recovered from Diana Vance's left wrist inside the forensic clean room just 14 hours prior. The mechanical hands of the watch were locked in a metallic stasis at exactly 9:52 p.m., a permanent, physical record of an execution that was about to collide with the sophisticated legal armor of the defense team. The United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois is now in session, Judge Evelyn Whitmore presiding. The court-martial announced, his voice flattening the room into an instant, breathless silence. Judge Whitmore, a veteran jurist known for her unyielding adherence to procedural precision and her total intolerance for political grandstanding, adjusted her robes and looked down over her elevated bench. Her eyes locked onto the defense table, her jaw set into a firm, uncompromised line. We are here for the formal arraignment and detention review in the matter of the United States versus Richard Sterling, case number 26 CR 8411. The defendant stands charged under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act with capital murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and the unlawful concealment of human remains. The government has filed a motion for permanent pretrial detention without bail. Mr. Vance, your client has received the formal indictment. How do you plead? Harlan Vance stood up slowly, his physical posture entirely relaxed, his tailored charcoal suit draped perfectly over his broad shoulders as he leaned forward, placing his hands flatly on the mahogany defense table. We plead absolutely not guilty, Your Honor. Vance's voice boomed through the courtroom, carrying a rich, theatrical resonance that instantly challenged the state's authority. He turned his head slightly, throwing a dismissive, calculated glare toward DeShazo and Thorne. Furthermore, the defense has filed an immediate, emergency motion to suppress the entirety of the digital financial records, the automated fuel logs, and the physical contents of the container recovered from the Calumet shipping terminal. We are asking this court to dismiss this indictment with prejudice, because what the government has presented today is not a portfolio of legal evidence. It is a predatory manipulation of ancient, unverified data designed to execute a political assassination against a sitting state senator. Vance stepped out from behind his table, pacing the well of the court with a slow, heavy deliberation that turned the courtroom into his private theater. Let us strip away the sensational, direct-to-media rhetoric that the district attorney displayed on television yesterday afternoon. The cornerstone of the government's entire probable cause statement rests on a legacy mainframe server seized from a defunct construction warehouse on the west side. They claim their cyber division broke a 35-year-old alphanumeric substitution code that connects a campaign trust fund to a private security firm called Apex Security Solutions. But they have completely failed to disclose to this court that this legacy database has suffered from over 3 decades of severe bit rot, digital degradation, and systemic file corruption. It is an unverified, obsolete accounting ledger that has passed through dozens of unknown hands before falling into a federal storage locker. To use an unauthenticated, ancient piece of software code to strip an elder statesman of his liberty is an administrative outrage that shatters every standard of due process under the Fifth Amendment. Vance slammed a thick, blue-bound binder of scientific affidavits onto the podium, his eyes narrowing as he looked up at Judge Whitmore. I have provided this court with sworn statements from 2 of the leading software engineering professors at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. They have analyzed the government's decryption protocols and have stated under oath that the alphanumeric substitution code utilized by investigator Thorne's team is completely arbitrary. It is a subjective narrative forced onto a chaotic, fragmented data field by a desperate cold case task force seeking to justify its federal funding allocation. If you alter a single variable in their cryptographic matrix, the name Richard Sterling vanishes entirely from the ledger, replaced by random noise. You cannot incarcerate a human being based on an algorithm that changes its answers depending on who is pulling the lever. Judge Whitmore adjusted her glasses, reviewing the defense affidavits on her digital screen, her expression remaining entirely illegible. She turned her gaze toward the prosecution table. Mr. DeShazo, the defense is raising a fundamental challenge regarding the authenticity and structural integrity of your digital origin point. If your ledger is a corrupted artifact of software degradation, your probable cause matrix begins to fracture. How does the government respond to the defense's medical and technical analysis? District Attorney DeShazo did not stand up immediately. He allowed Pendleton's theatrical echo to fully fade from the room, letting the silence become heavy and uncomfortable before he slowly rose from his chair, holding a single, slim white folder in his hand. He did not slide documents across the table. He walked straight to the podium, his voice cutting through the defense's rhetoric with the sharp, clean precision of an executioner's axe. Your Honor, counsel's performance is a brilliant exercise in technical obfuscation, designed to comfort the corporate real estate boards that are currently watching their stock valuations dissolve on the morning news, DeShazo stated, his voice quiet, steady, and carrying the absolute weight of the state's power. But the law does not operate on theoretical software models or paid academic affidavits. It operates on physical, undeniable corroboration. Harlan Vance can claim that our alphanumeric substitution code is a subjective narrative, but He has completely failed to explain to this court how a subjective narrative possesses the supernatural capacity to predict the exact geographic coordinates of a hidden forensic vault buried 6 feet beneath a reinforced concrete shipping dock. DeShazo hit a button on his console, and the digital display screen behind him transformed, replacing the image of the frozen wristwatch with a high-definition, multispectral digital radar scan of the Calumet shipping terminal. "This is not random software noise, Your Honor," DeShazo barked, his voice dropping into a hard, driving cadence that forced every eye in the room onto the screen. Acting on the precise alphanumeric string recovered from that corrupted Union pension server, a sequence that listed redevelopment site Alpha, drainage cistern 4, investigator Thorne's team deployed diamond core drills into the concrete foundation on Tuesday morning. They did not search a general area. They drilled down through a single 12-inch coordinate point and struck a vulcanized polymer chemical drum that had been hermetically sealed from the outside world since December 12, 1991. Inside that container sat the perfectly preserved body of Diana Vance, her winter coat still buttoned against her throat, her press identification badge placed deliberately on top of the container, like an executioner's signature. That is not a subjective interpretation of data, Your Honor. That is an absolute physical match. The algorithm didn't guess the location. It remembered it because Richard Sterling's campaign trust checkbook paid for the logistics of the burial. Harlan Vance stepped forward, his face hardening as he attempted to cut off the prosecutor's momentum. The discovery of a container beneath a public shipping terminal is a tragic archaeological development, Your Honor. But it does not connect my client to the crime. Thousands of demolition contractors, industrial workers, and port laborers had total, unrestricted access to that casting house during the redevelopment phase of '92. The fact that a chemical drum was found on land that my client's corporation later developed does not constitute proof of personal involvement in a capital homicide. Then let us discuss the automated fuel logs that counsel wishes to suppress. Investigator Marcus Thorne spoke, stepping up to the podium beside DeShazo, his voice a low, gravel-heavy baritone that carried the grit of the city's streets. He pulled a certified document from